If the gods never existed, then who built the places they left behind? You stand before a ruin older than memory, its stones too vast for the tools that history allows. Each block weighs hundreds of tons, yet rests as if it were set by invisible hands. Chisel marks vanish where they should remain. Geometry folds into perfection. Every line whispers of impossible knowledge of builders who carved mountains as if they were wax. And in the dust between those stones, you can almost hear it, the echo of a vanished age when humans and gods might have shared the same breath. The noise of the modern world fades, replaced by the hum of deep time. You draw closer to the cold face of the ancient wall, tracing your fingers across the stone's skin, feeling a pulse that shouldn't be there. The air thickens. The investigation begins not of belief, but of evidence. You're standing at the threshold of forgotten divinity, where myth and masonry blur. These ruins don't just age, they resist time itself. Scholars debate, engineers calculate, skeptics laugh, and still the stones refuse to explain themselves. Across continents, the same patterns repeat, as if one unseen hand designed them all. Maybe it was genius, maybe it was something more. What matters is that every block, every alignment, every whisper in the dust asks the same question: who were the true architects of our world? Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. You begin with weight, not the poetic kind, but the kind that bends cranes and cracks foundations. In the Lebanese hills at Baalbek, 3 colossal stones sit as though they were placed by some lazy god who ran out of smaller blocks. Each one weighs more than a fully loaded Boeing 747, and they rest with an indifference that mocks both gravity and human pride. The Romans later built a temple around them, and though they tried to claim credit, even they admitted the stones were there long before them, immovable, ancient, and inexplicable. You can almost picture their engineers squinting upward, scratching their heads, muttering Latin prayers to gods they no longer truly believed in. When you look closely, the seams between these blocks are thinner than a knife's shadow. The precision defies the primitive tools we assign to the past. No cranes, no pulleys, no iron, just stone. And yet the blocks are set as if by a single unbroken motion. Modern engineers have tried to model the feat. Some say ramps, others imagine wooden rollers. But every simulation collapses under its own weight, both literal and logical. Even with today's machines moving, such stones would demand resources absurdly out of proportion to any ancient city's capacity. So the question grows heavier than the stone itself: why attempt what couldn't be done? Your mind drifts across oceans to the high plateau of the Andes, where another puzzle rests under the open sky. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones of red sandstone lie scattered, as if a divine workshop had been struck by lightning. Some of the blocks fit together like three-dimensional puzzles carved with precision so fine that air cannot pass through the joints. The Incas said the site was built long before their time by beings who could sing stone into motion. A myth, perhaps. But sometimes myths endure because they describe something people once saw but could never explain. A gentle wind moves across the plain, and you imagine what the place must have looked like when it was whole. The walls would have gleamed under starlight, their angles aligned with celestial precision. Each doorway framed a constellation. Each platform pointed to a horizon event, the rising of Venus, the descent of the sun. Architecture as calendar, as ritual, as memory. But if this was divine geometry who taught it, Nan Madol, the so-called Venice of the Pacific, sits half-drowned off the coast of Micronesia. Their basalt columns form walls rising straight from the sea, creating a city of canals and tombs. Local legend claims it was built by two brothers who summoned the stones through the air carried by chance. The basalt pillars, some weighing up to 50 tons, were quarried miles away. When scientists tried to reconstruct how such columns might have been moved, they found that the stones shattered under the strain of modern lifting equipment. The ruins stubbornly remained silent. The rational explanation always arrives late, wearing the suit of skepticism. Ramps, levers, logs, manpower, thousands of laborers over generations. And yet the math rebels. The logistics never align with what's physically possible given the era's tools. Still, you remind yourself that disbelief is not evidence and mystery is not proof. The truth lives somewhere between the space where ingenuity meets myth. Maybe ancient builders did possess lost techniques, methods forgotten, erased by war flood or pride. Human history is full of rediscoveries mistaken for miracles. Yet when you look again at Baalbek, at Pumapunku, at Nan Madol, something nags. The architecture isn't merely functional, it's deliberate, symbolic. The proportions, the alignments, the placement of each block all seem to participate in a dialogue too vast for practicality alone. These aren't the works of desperate laborers dragging rocks for kings. They are statements, almost signatures. Each ruin hums with a strange awareness, as if it remembers the hands that touched it. You recall the feeling from the first ruin, the faint vibration beneath your fingertips. It's as though every ancient site carries a frequency inaudible but perceptible, echoing through time. Archaeologists might dismiss such impressions as the imagination's echo chamber, but those who've stood in these places know there's a presence, something that feels awake beneath the stone. A few researchers, dismissed as fringe thinkers, have proposed that these sites were built not before known civilizations, but between them remnants of a forgotten cycle of humanity that rose and fell long before recorded history began. If that's true, the ruins don't represent the dawn of civilization, but its afterglow. They would be the bones of a species that once brushed the divine and paid the price of hubris. Still others whisper a bolder idea that these were not human works at all, but monuments left by something greater, something that guided early humanity, then withdrew, leaving us to puzzle over their abandoned architecture like children wandering through a half-finished cathedral. The idea lingers because deep down you feel it too. These stones weren't merely built. They were placed with intent, precision, and something like reverence. As the night deepens, the image of those ruins stays with you. You picture the builders, whoever they were, standing beneath unfamiliar stars, shaping stone as though it were clay, leaving behind whispers of their forgotten craft. You begin to sense that the mystery isn't just about how they did it, but why they stopped. Soon, you'll discover that the deeper question isn't weight or distance, it's precision, the kind that mocks imperfection itself. The deeper you go into the mystery, the quieter the world becomes. You start to realize that the true miracle of the ruins isn't their size, but their accuracy. The weight of the stones may defy reason, but it's the precision that breaks it entirely. Across continents and ages, blocks fit together so tightly that even a human hair would struggle to slip between them. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the stones ripple like liquid, melting into each other in seams that follow no straight line and yet seal more perfectly than modern masonry. You trace the edge of one block with your mind, 13 sides, each unique, each touching its neighbor with seamless intimacy. There is no mortar, no filler, just intention made permanent. It's as if the builders weren't stacking stones, but folding the earth itself. When Spanish conquistadors first arrived, they tried to pry the stones apart. They failed. They tried to replicate the craftsmanship. they failed again. The Incas, when asked how such perfection was achieved, said it was the work of the gods before them. The statement was both humble and final, as if they knew some knowledge wasn't theirs to explain. Today, stonemasons examine those joints and shake their heads, admitting quietly that even with diamond tools cutting those curves and achieving such airtight unions would demand an obsessive precision and time that no known civilization could afford. A pattern begins to emerge. The deeper you look, the sharper it becomes. At Pumapunku, those infamous H-blocks are carved to mathematical exactitude. Their edges remain sharp after centuries of erosion, and their surfaces are polished like glass. Modern engineers have measured their cuts and found tolerances within fractions of a millimeter standards used today in aerospace manufacturing. Yet the site predates the invention of the wheel in South America. Something doesn't add up. In Egypt, you walk through the Great Pyramid's silent corridors, where granite blocks line the king's chamber with such accuracy that even modern lasers struggle to find an error. Some joints are tighter than the tolerance of a modern aircraft fuselage. The air inside the chamber feels engineered, controlled by angles, harmonics, and intent. When sound moves through it, it doesn't echo. It resonates. It's the same kind of resonance you felt at Baalbek, the faint hum beneath the skin of the stone. Coincidence, perhaps, or the fingerprint of a method we no longer understand. Historians explain it through patience. Thousands of workers, generations of practice tools of copper and persistence. And yes, humanity has accomplished wonders through endurance alone. But then there's that one inconvenient detail: copper doesn't cut granite. It polishes, it scratches, but it doesn't shape. So how did they carve such tight corners and mirror-smooth faces into stone harder than steel? A controversial theory once suggested sonic levitation sound frequencies tuned to manipulate matter. Mainstream science dismissed it as pseudoscience, yet experiments with acoustic vibration have shown that small objects can indeed be moved by sound. In myth, God spoke creation into existence. In stone, perhaps they left a record of that voice. You remember the stories from the Andes beings who could move mountains by song. Maybe myth isn't a lie. Maybe it's memory disguised as reverence. You can almost hear the rhythm of the ancient chisels. Or were they even chisels? Imagine a tool that cut without cutting, that shaped without force, that vibrated at the perfect frequency to part atoms like sand. We can't name it because we've forgotten it. And that is what makes this precision so haunting. It isn't just an achievement, it's a conversation we can no longer join. Even stranger are the patterns shared across continents. Builders from Egypt, Peru, Cambodia, and Japan seem to have worked from the same geometric grammar despite having no contact, no trade, and no shared language. Their ruins hum to the same invisible mathematics ratios that match the golden mean alignments, that follow the cardinal directions angles that mirror celestial coordinates. It's as if they were following an ancient blueprint, one so universal it transcended geography. The skeptic in you wants to call it coincidence, but coincidences lose credibility when they start forming straight lines across the globe. Some scholars have quietly begun revisiting the idea of technological amnesia, that humanity might have reached great heights before, only to collapse, lose everything, and begin again. Civilizations rise, then crumble. Their libraries burn, their tools rust. What survives is stone. Stone is patient. Stone doesn't care who worships it. It only remembers. And in the seams of those perfect joints, it remembers something we've forgotten: the sound of order, the hum of purpose. You think back to Baalbek, the titanic blocks heavy beyond logic, and realize that their true defiance isn't their size but their fitting. The Romans could have stacked smaller stones. They didn't. The gods, or whoever played that role, chose to work in the language of precision, the kind that endures not for beauty, but for eternity. There's an almost tender irony here. The ancients carved to perfection, not because they sought power, but permanence. And now, centuries later, we kneel in the dust they left, measuring their ghosts with lasers and calculators, still unable to match their grace. It's humbling in a way that feels divine. As night descends, you linger before a block at Pumapunku, your reflection faintly visible in its ancient polish. You whisper a question to the stone, knowing it won't answer, but somehow you think it understands. Maybe perfection wasn't their goal. Maybe it was their message. And if that's true, the next step is clear. To follow that message upward to the stars they so carefully mirrored. You stand beneath an ancient sky, and suddenly the stones make sense. The lines, the angles, the strange alignments, they weren't built to impress the earth. They were built to speak to the heavens. Across continents, the great builders turned their gaze upward and inscribed the stars into their monuments. They didn't just honor the gods, they mapped them. The earth became a reflection of the cosmos, and humanity, still young, still terrified, built temples not to live in, but to remember where they came from. In Egypt, the pyramids of Giza form a pattern that mirrors Orion's belt. The correlation is so exact that when seen from above, it's almost eerie. 3 bright stars, 3 towering monuments offset by the same slight angle. Scholars debate whether it's coincidence or intention, but deep down, even skeptics admit there's something deliberate about that precision. The Great Pyramid's shafts align not only with Orion, but with the star Sirius, the brightest in the night sky, known to the ancients as the celestial mother who heralded the Nile's flood. The structure is less a tomb and more a message carved into the ground, one that says we knew the heavens as intimately as we knew the sand beneath our feet. Travel west, and you find the same pattern carved into another continent. The great city of Teotihuacan in Mexico was built along a layout that mirrors the movements of planets. The Avenue of the Dead aligns with the setting of the Pleiades, the cluster once called the 7 Sisters of Creation. The pyramids of the sun and moon rise with geometric precision that echoes solar cycles and equinoxes. Whoever designed them understood celestial mechanics centuries before Galileo ever lifted a telescope. And yet no inscriptions name their architects. No statues immortalize their rulers. It's as if the builders wanted to erase themselves, leaving only the pattern intact, as if they were fulfilling a promise made to something beyond the stars. In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor Wat hides the same secret. Beneath its towers and galleries lies a celestial blueprint, each temple aligned with the movement of constellations across the sky. The central spire marks the heart of the cosmos. Its 4 surrounding towers mirror the stars of Draco, the celestial serpent. At dawn, during the equinox, the rising sun crowns the temple, perfectly bathing its corridors in gold. The architects of Angkor Wat weren't just constructing for worship, they were synchronizing the human world with the cosmic one. You begin to sense a shared instinct, spanning oceans and millennia, an ancient obsession with anchoring heaven to earth. Modern researchers, with their satellites and software, continue to uncover new alignments every year. Stonehenge marks solstices with impossible accuracy. Machu Picchu traces solar paths with the discipline of a laboratory instrument. The Great Zimbabwe ruins echo lunar cycles through their curving walls. Even the Nazca lines, those sprawling geoglyphs scratched into the Peruvian desert, seem to form astronomical diagrams visible only from above. Some say they were offerings to sky gods. Others whisper that they were navigation markers for beings who could actually see from the sky. You tell yourself that's myth, but a small part of you isn't sure. Because the more you look, the more the evidence seems to ask the same quiet question. Why did every civilization feel compelled to map the stars with such impossible devotion? Why repeat the same geometry across continents under different names, yet to the same rhythm? One theory, cautious and academic, suggests that these alignments reflect agricultural necessity. Early calendars meant to track seasons. It's plausible. Crops need timing. Societies need order. But that explanation feels too tidy, too human. It doesn't account for the scale, the precision, the sheer ambition. Farmers don't build monuments that last for eternity. Priests and dreamers do. Another interpretation is less comfortable, that these were messages, coordinates in a conversation that stretched beyond the planet. A way of saying, we remember you, to the beings, or perhaps the ancestors, who once came from above. You recall how in the myths of so many cultures, gods descend in fire, in light, or in thunder. The Sumerians told of Anu, ruler of the heavens, and his emissaries, who brought knowledge to humankind. The Mayans told of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, who fell from the stars to teach civilization. Even the Egyptians described their gods as those who came from the Duat, a realm that was both beneath and beyond the sky. And you start to wonder if those stories are describing the same event, repeated in different tongues, remembered through the language of stone and constellation. The ruins could be the remaining script of that first contact, humanity's attempt to write back. The air shifts as you imagine the builders standing under the same stars. You see now eyes reflecting firelight and skylight hammering meaning into stone. Perhaps they believed that by mirroring the heavens, they could draw the gods down again, reopening a cosmic channel. Or perhaps they simply wanted to remind the divine that Earth was still listening. Either way, they built not to be seen from the ground, but from above. You think back to the impossible precision of Pumapunku and the weight of Baalbek's stones. Both mysteries now orbit a larger question. Why did all this effort, the weight, the precision, the perfect angles, serve a celestial design? The builders weren't merely engineers. They were astronomers, priests, and poets of geometry. They wove star charts into architecture and prayers into blueprints. Some skeptics argue that humans driven by wonder alone can achieve miracles. They say the sky was humanity's first teacher, the oldest text. Maybe they're right. Maybe all these monuments are simply the result of our species staring upward too long and dreaming too big. But as you stand beneath the imagined night that guided those builders, you feel that the dream itself was guided, that someone somewhere was watching, whispering coordinates into mortal ears. You lift your eyes toward the constellations and realize something else. Every ruin you've seen so far is not random. They form patterns, lines across maps, connections you can trace like veins on the skin of the earth. The sky builders weren't just looking up. They were mapping something down here too. And that realization brings you to the next descent beneath the soil, where more secrets hide, where the divine might have retreated when the stars fell silent. You descend beneath the earth, and the air changes. It's colder here, older too. Stone turns to silence, and silence to memory. The ancients called these places wombs of the gods. But what you find carved into the dark feels less like devotion and more like communication. Across the world, hidden beneath cities and deserts alike, ancient builders dug vast underground complexes, some so intricate they seem designed not for people, but for something else entirely, something that wanted to be remembered. In Turkey, beneath the dusty hills of Cappadocia, lies Derinkuyu, a city that stretches more than 280 feet underground, with room for 20,000 people. Its tunnels twist like veins connecting kitchens, temples, and air shafts in a design that defies primitive planning. But what makes Derinkuyu extraordinary isn't its size. It's its purpose. Archaeologists once thought it was built as a wartime refuge, yet there's no evidence of extended conflict nearby, nor signs of long-term habitation. The ventilation is too complex, the chambers too deliberate. Some sections appear to resonate acoustically, almost like frequency chambers. Why would a Bronze Age community carve sound into stone, and Derinkuyu isn't alone? Beneath Malta, over 1,000 miles away, lies the Hippodrome of Hal Saflieni, a 3-level labyrinth of limestone chambers cut with surgical precision. Within its walls, archaeologists discovered bones of people unusually tall, their skulls elongated and symmetrical, unlike typical human remains. Locals once whispered that the Hippodrome was a gate for the old gods, and even now modern scientists admit that its acoustic design amplifies low frequencies at exactly 110 Hz, a tone associated with altered states of consciousness. Standing there, sound vibrates through your bones like a memory of something vast and sleeping. Travel east, and the pattern deepens. In India, beneath the temples of Ellora, lies the Kailasa complex, a monolith carved downward directly from a single mountain. The scale is almost mocking, thousands of tons of rock removed without written plans or visible scaffolding. The more archaeologists analyze it, the stranger it becomes. Its geometry is reversed, as if the builders understood space from a perspective outside human logic. Myth says it was built in a single night by celestial artisans who descended from the heavens. Engineers today quietly admit even with modern machinery replicating it would take decades. Then there's Egypt, the land where gods and kings once shared the same vocabulary. Beneath the plateau of Saqqara lies the Serapeum, a tunnel complex holding granite sarcophagi, weighing up to 80 tons each. They're carved so precisely that even with lasers, modern tools struggle to achieve similar accuracy. Each box is polished to a mirror finish inside with no visible tool marks. Egyptologists call them tombs of sacred bulls, but no inscriptions confirm it. The lids fit so tightly, they create a vacuum seal. Why build such precision underground, unseen by the sun, unseen by worshippers, unless the builders weren't building for humans at all? The more ruins you examine, the clearer the pattern becomes. These subterranean sanctuaries aren't defensive, they're preservative. They're designed to endure cataclysm, to store something of immense value. Not gold, not bodies, but knowledge. Some theorists whisper of a global archive, a network of sacred chambers holding records of an age before history, a memory bank for a civilization wiped clean. The idea seems wild, yet traces appear everywhere. The underground tunnels of Cusco said to connect ancient temples, the forgotten labyrinth beneath Giza sealed by floods, the sunken passages of Derinkuyu linking to others still undiscovered. As you move through these ancient corridors, another realization takes shape. Each underground site mirrors the heavens above it. The Hippodrome aligns with the Pleiades. Derinkuyu's layout echoes Orion's belt. Even the Giza Plateau's substructures follow celestial geometry. Above the gods, below their reflection. Between them, humanity trapped in the thin layer of earth that remembers both. Modern science tries to explain this away. They speak of safety ritual coincidence. Yet the more data collected, radio scans, satellite mapping, LiDAR imaging, the less it looks like chance. Beneath the world's sacred sites, there's a repeating signature like an architectural fingerprint. The angles, the acoustics, the orientation they obey, a logic we still don't fully grasp. Engineers studying the Hippodrome's resonance patterns found that its tones could influence brainwave activity, inducing states of deep calm or euphoria. In experiments, human subjects reported sensations of presence of hearing voices or feeling watched. Ancient rituals often described such effects as the arrival of the divine. Perhaps the temples didn't just honor the gods, they summoned them through sound, through geometry, through vibration. You pause your flashlight dimming against the stone walls. The silence feels alive, like the darkness is listening back. And then it hits you, the thought that's been forming since the first ruins. Maybe the gods didn't disappear. Maybe they just went underground. If the ancients believed the divine once walked among them, these sanctuaries may have been more than monuments. They were shelters built to preserve contact during the great silence that followed. When the sky went quiet, they turned downward, searching for echoes of the beings that once spoke through stars. What we call ruins might not be remnants of worship, but remnants of waiting. As you emerge from the depths, the sunlight feels foreign, almost intrusive. You blink, adjusting to its warmth. The world above is modern, loud, impatient. Yet somewhere below, buried in the silence, the stones are still humming, still tuned to the same forgotten frequency. And in that hum lies your next lead. For if the divine withdrew beneath the surface, what traces did they leave in the materials themselves, in the stones that refuse to erode, in metals that shouldn't exist, in tools we've never been able to replicate? The next question isn't where the gods went. It's what they left behind. You start to notice it, the way certain symbols seem to repeat across continents, etched into temple lintels, carved into cliff faces, whispered through millennia by hands that never met. At first glance, they're simple spirals, suns, and eyes. But look closer, and they start to speak, just not in any language you've ever learned. Archaeologists have long claimed that writing began around 3200 BCE in Mesopotamia. Yet scattered across the globe are marks thousands of years older, too structured to be art, too deliberate to be coincidence. In the desert cliffs of Egypt's Wadi el-Hol, faint carvings twist across the limestone early hieroglyphs, or so scholars thought. But when the symbols were analyzed, some bore uncanny resemblance to characters found half a world away, specifically the Indus Valley script, carved into soapstone seals from Pakistan. The resemblance was dismissed as happenstance, of course, but the frequency of shared motifs, the looping serpent, the winged disc, the twin pillars, suggests something more deliberate, something exchanged long before ships could cross oceans. And then there's Göbekli Tepe, older than the pyramids, older even than written language itself. Its T-shaped pillars are decorated with foxes, scorpions, and birds, totems of some long-forgotten cosmology. What puzzles researchers isn't the imagery, but the repetition. The same scorpion motif appears at Karahunj in Armenia, and again in the petroglyphs of Utah's Canyonlands. These sites are separated by oceans, yet they hum with the same pattern, the same artistic code, as if different cultures were referencing a shared lexicon that predated them all. You run your hand over one of the carved stones and realize the linework has a rhythm to it. Not random, it flows like syntax. The ancients weren't just decorating, they were transmitting. A language not of sound, but of shape and frequency. Modern researchers have begun calling this geomantic communication, messages encoded in form, proportion, and resonance rather than words. In a way, the stones were their servers, their databanks, their way of ensuring a message survived long after its speakers were gone. But what message? Some clues hide in plain sight. The winged sun disk, found from Egypt to Persia to Mesoamerica, always hovers between two vertical columns, a gate perhaps. In Sumerian myth, the god Utu rises through a gate of the east every dawn. In Egyptian ritual, Ra sails through twin pylons of light. In Inca legend, Viracocha walks between two pillars of sunrise. 3 continents, 1 image, no shared trade routes. The same story told in different tongues, like fragments of an older sentence spoken by gods and later imitated by men. Then there are the serpent carvings. From Angkor Wat to Chichen Itza, from Malta to the Mississippi, they slither through temple reliefs and foundation stones. The serpent symbol of knowledge, rebirth, infinity. Or perhaps a signature. Some scholars suggest the symbol represents an ancient navigational code, waves, currents, frequencies. Others think it's an identifier, the mark of the builders themselves, passed on like a hidden watermark through each new civilization that inherited their ruins. And still skeptics insist on coincidence. They argue that humans everywhere looked up at the same stars, saw the same animals, shared the same instincts, which sounds reasonable until you examine the geometry. The ratios used in these carvings, particularly the recurring 1:1.618, the golden ratio, appear in temple walls from Peru to Egypt to Japan. Not approximate ratios, identical measurements. Somehow without connection, they carved to the same universal code. You remember the last section, those underground sanctuaries tuned to resonate at 110 Hz. The same tone appears carved into stone in musical form at Chavin de Huantar, Peru, a spiral duct system that literally sings when wind passes through it. Some think it was an oracle, others think it was an amplifier. But if tone and symbol share a relationship, if sound could speak through stone, then the ancients may not have been recording words at all. They may have been recording vibrations. When modern engineers laser scan ancient inscriptions, they find a strange uniformity. Certain grooves are consistently deeper, always in patterns that repeat at mathematically significant intervals. It's as if each mark corresponds to a frequency, like a frozen chord in rock. You start to wonder, what if decoding the language of the stones isn't about translation, but resonance? What if these carvings are instructions not for the eyes, but for the earth itself? It's not just speculation. In 2019, a research team studying petroglyphs in Sardinia and the American Southwest noticed identical spiral carvings that, when overlaid onto magnetic maps, align perfectly with geomagnetic anomalies. Some of these stones, when struck, emit tones matching those frequencies. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the ancients were mapping not stars, but energies, using symbols as keys to interact with the natural power of the planet. And if so, then those symbols were more than messages, they were interfaces. A way to speak with the gods who supposedly built the world, or at least with the forces they embodied. But there's another layer, one that archaeologists prefer not to discuss in public. Across several sites from Pumapunku in Bolivia to Abydos in Egypt, inscriptions have been found partially melted, as if the stone had been softened like wax. Scientists struggle to explain this. Some invoke ancient fires or meteor strikes, yet the patterns of deformation follow the carved lines exactly like a deliberate fusion stone, responding to energy rather than heat. If true, it suggests the ancients not only spoke through the stones, but with them. You remember a phrase from an old Sumerian tablet, the stones remember. It once sounded poetic. Now it feels literal. A few fringe linguists propose that early alphabets evolved from sacred geometry itself. The letter A, they note, mirrors the pyramid, the mountain, the gateway. O reflects the sun, the cycle, eternity. The first languages might not have been about communication between people, but between people and gods. A way to vibrate reality into harmony with divine order. And perhaps that's why, when the gods vanished, humanity kept carving anyway, like children repeating the sounds of a forgotten tongue. As you leave the site, the afternoon light cuts across the carvings, and for a fleeting second, they shimmer as if the stone is catching a memory of something it once understood. You realize the ancients didn't just build monuments, they left messages. But we've been reading them with the wrong senses. The stones are still speaking. We've just forgotten how to listen. You've seen the carvings, the impossible stones, the symbols that speak across oceans. But in every one of those stories, etched in rock, whispered in temple walls, there's another constant. Fire. Not the simple flame of torches or the hearth, but a fire that falls from the heavens, that burns without smoke, that strikes with precision and purpose. Ancient texts call it the weapon of the gods. Myths across continents describe it differently, but they all mean the same thing. Light that kills thunder that obeys. In India's Mahabharata, entire cities are said to have been consumed by a single projectile, charged with all the power of the universe. The text speaks of corpses burned beyond recognition of hair, and nails falling out of food, turning inedible, all described millennia before anyone imagined radiation. Skeptics call it metaphor, the poetry of ancient war. But when excavations at Mohenjo-Daro revealed skeletons fused into the streets, their bones retaining higher than normal radiation levels, the poetry began to sound like reportage. Thousands of miles away, the Hopi speak of the fire from the sky that once scorched the earth, clean forcing survivors underground. In the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah meet their end with a rain of fire and brimstone. In Egypt, the eye of Ra burns humanity when it grows rebellious. Different gods, different languages, but the same pattern of punishment, the same technology disguised as wrath. You think back to the last chapter, to the possibility that ancient symbols encoded energy. What if those symbols weren't only for harmony, but for control? What if the builders knew how to command power on a planetary scale, how to harness the Earth's hidden currents and the sky's invisible charges? Let's move carefully. History does record ancient uses of fire after all. The Greeks built polished shields to focus sunlight into heat. The Chinese engineered black powder long before the West. But none of those explain vitrified fortresses, stone walls in Scotland, Turkey, and India fused into glass, as if melted by lightning that lasted too long. Experiments to replicate these effects with primitive fires have failed. The heat required would exceed 1,500 degrees Celsius. Something else caused that glow. Something precise. At Sacsayhuaman near Cusco, enormous blocks fit together like puzzle pieces, edges softened, surfaces smoothed. Some theorists suggest the stones were melted and molded into place. If that sounds impossible, remember that the Andes are littered with traces of obsidian-like slag, as if heat once kissed the mountains and solidified them mid-flow. The Incas said their gods shaped the stones with sound and fire. That might have been myth until modern acoustics showed that sound waves can indeed alter molecular structure under high resonance. Fire from the gods might have been more than flame. It might have been energy, vibration, light weaponized. You remember the melted glyphs at Abydos. Now they seem part of the same pattern energy that interacts with matter, rewriting it. Ancient priests may not have worshipped the gods for creation, but for their control of that fire, the gift that turned stone to liquid, silence to thunder. And yet every civilization that speaks of divine fire also warns of its loss. The Greeks tell of Prometheus punished for stealing it. The Mayans write of the sun being restarted after darkness swallowed the world. In China, the goddess Nua forges the heavens anew after they collapse in flame. These are not creation myths, they're survival stories. Someone misused the fire, and the gods withdrew. Modern researchers trace signs of ancient catastrophe around 12th and 800 years ago, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Microscopic spherules, carbon layers, and melt glass fragments appear in sediment across North America and the Middle East. Whatever happened, it burned hot enough to melt stone and end an ice age. But in oral traditions from that very era, the event is described not as nature's accident, but as retribution. The sky broke open, say the Ojibwe. The stars fell, say the Aboriginal Australians. The gods returned in anger, say the Sumerians. Perhaps that's how memory works. A meteor becomes a god's weapon. A cosmic disaster becomes moral punishment. But when you see vitrified stone burn strata and simultaneous global myths, you start to wonder if myth is history wearing a mask. Consider Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. Its layout suggests a knowledge of cosmic energy flow, its central avenue aligned perfectly with celestial coordinates. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies a tunnel lined with mica, a mineral used in modern technology as an insulator against high heat and radiation. No one knows why it's there. It serves no aesthetic purpose, but it could theoretically handle electricity. The same material appears at Baalbek and Pumapunku. 3 sites, 3 continents, one strange conductive signature. Coincidence or a technology forgotten? A fragment of irony floats through your thoughts. Maybe the ancients didn't have myths about gods with weapons. Maybe they had memories of engineers with tools. Maybe divine fire was once a science. And when that science consumed its masters, the survivors turned fear into worship and knowledge into taboo. That would explain the silence in so many ancient records, the deliberate erasures, the sudden gaps where explanation should be. Knowledge burned, then buried. You picture it, a civilization standing at the edge of its own brilliance, summoning power from the skies, until the skies struck back. A self-inflicted apocalypse later rewritten as divine punishment. Humanity inherited the ruins, but not the reason. And so we built our religions over the ashes, mistaking warning for wonder. But one puzzle remains. If the gods or their engineers once wielded energy that could melt mountains, why did they vanish? Did they flee the fire or fall to it? The next clue may lie not in flame, but in absence. Across continents, entire civilizations erased their own presence, dismantled their temples, buried their knowledge, an act of mass forgetting. It's almost as if they feared someone or something finding what they'd built. And so the story moves from fire to silence, from divine punishment to deliberate disappearance. The next ruins hold no flames, no thunder, only questions carved into the void they left behind. The trail of fire fades, leaving only dust, silence, and questions. You find yourself before another enigma, this one not about destruction, but disappearance. The builders of the world's first monuments, the makers of perfect stone, seem to have walked off the stage of history without a trace. No battle, no plague, no collapse we can measure. They simply stopped. Take Göbekli Tepe, perched on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey. 12,000 years old, it stands as the first known temple complex on Earth, predating Stonehenge by 6 millennia. Its pillars rise from the ground in geometric circles carved with lions, vultures, and scorpions. It's as if the Neolithic world woke up one morning already fluent in architecture, engineering, and symbolism. Then, almost overnight, they buried it all beneath tons of sand and rubble, as though hiding something or sealing it away. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt unearthed the site in the 1990s, he assumed it was a shrine left unfinished. But as the excavation deepened, he realized the opposite: it was completed, and then intentionally entombed. Not abandoned, not forgotten, buried by design. The soil samples showed no sign of catastrophe or natural sedimentation. Someone covered the entire complex, deliberately structure by structure, preserving it for someone else. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. Across the globe, the same pattern repeats. At Pumapunku, enormous stone blocks were abandoned mid-placement, the quarry tools gone. In Nan Madol, the basalt city of the Pacific buildings were half sunk into the sea long before erosion could have done it. In Teotihuacan, the people who built the city of the gods vanished centuries before the Aztecs arrived. They left no names, no royal tombs, no inscriptions claiming credit. The Aztecs only called it the place where gods were made. That phrase lingers in your mind. Made, not worshipped. Could that be literal? If the ancients believed gods were creators, perhaps they saw themselves as their successors, engineers inheriting divine blueprints. Maybe they built in imitation of something greater, and when that imitation went wrong, they erased themselves to prevent a repeat. It's a chilling thought, civilizations that knew too much and chose silence over survival. Archaeologists propose simpler explanations. Climate change, famine, migration, those are safer words. But the timing feels uncanny. Göbekli Tepe was buried around the same period the Younger Dryas ended, when global temperatures spiked and sea levels rose. Floods swept coastlines, and myths of divine retribution spread like wildfire. The builders disappear just as the myths of fire from the heavens begin. Coincidence or cause? Some fringe researchers suggest these engineers didn't just vanish. They withdrew, that they had discovered something, energy resonance, perhaps knowledge of creation itself, and realized its danger. In that reading, Göbekli Tepe's burial wasn't an act of panic. It was an act of mercy, like locking a weapon in a vault and swallowing the key. You crouch in the dust beside one of Göbekli Tepe's great T-pillars. Its surface is smooth as bone, its carvings deep and deliberate. Two arms carved along the sides meet at the front, where a stone belt wraps the column's midsection. Hands without heads, bodies without faces. Schmidt believed these pillars represented beings. Others whisper they were beings' monuments built in the image of their makers. But who were they copying? Genetic evidence offers one more puzzle. Around the same time, Göbekli Tepe was active human DNA suddenly diversified. Not slowly, as evolution tends to, but in a sharp leap, new traits, new genes appearing across multiple regions. It's a leap science still struggles to explain. Some attribute it to population mixing after the Ice Age. Others call it something more unusual, an inheritance. If an earlier species or civilization once walked among us, teaching us, building for us, perhaps they left traces not just in stone, but in our blood. You remember the serpent carvings, the recurring symbols, echoes of the same hand. What if these vanished engineers weren't a single culture, but a network of civilizations connected by shared purpose builders who moved across the world long before our maps existed, guided by geometry, astronomy, and an understanding of energy we've barely begun to recover? Their disappearance could mark the end of a project, rather than the end of a people. When the fire came, they scattered, hiding their work in plain sight. Modern excavations hint at something strange beneath Göbekli Tepe's buried layers. Ground-penetrating radar shows deeper chambers unopened, untouched. Some believe they hold the key to the site's burial, possibly an archive or tomb. But official teams have hesitated to dig. Publicly, it's to preserve the integrity of the structure. Privately, whispers say the readings are anomalous. Magnetic irregularities, high static fields, instruments failing for no clear reason. You find yourself smiling despite the eerie chill that travels down your arms. If the site was truly sealed by those who built it, maybe they didn't want their descendants opening it too soon. Maybe they believed humanity needed time 10,000 years of forgetting before it could understand what lay below. Across the world, that same hush appears in different forms: the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, the buried city of Derinkuyu, the sealed tunnels of Teotihuacan. Each feels like a chapter that ends mid-sentence. Someone began a story, then stopped writing, and if you listen long enough, you can almost hear why perhaps they realized they were no longer the authors. The irony of it doesn't escape you. We call them primitive. We say they had no wheels, no writing, no understanding of mechanics. Yet we cannot replicate their works, cannot lift their stones, cannot decode their silence. In that sense, maybe the true mystery isn't their disappearance, it's our arrogance in assuming they needed our explanations. As dusk settles over the Anatolian plain, you watch the last light fall across Göbekli Tepe's buried hill. Beneath your feet lie the remnants of a civilization that may have known too much to survive. And somewhere out there, maybe in another forgotten valley, another desert, another ruin, their successors left something else. One final message before the gods' engineers disappeared for good. The next step is to trace their footprints on a scale too vast to be coincidence. The pattern that connects them all. You start mapping them out. The sites, the stones, the silent architects who vanished without a word, and the more you draw, the more uneasy you become. Because the pattern refuses to stay random. Lines begin to connect places that should have no connection. Ancient temples, megalithic ruins, and long-buried sanctuaries fall neatly along invisible threads, stretching across the globe, as if the earth itself were their canvas. You're not the first to notice. Explorers, surveyors, and mystics have whispered about it for centuries. But what they called coincidence now looks more like choreography. Take a globe. Draw a line from Easter Island to the Nazca Plateau, then to Giza, Babylon, Khajuraho, Angkor Wat, and Nan Madol. You'll find they rest almost perfectly along a single great circle, an equatorial path tilted just 30 degrees off the modern equator. Within 1/10 of a degree, the world's most mysterious sites align like beads on a string. No shared culture, no known trade, just geometry on a planetary scale. When pilots first began using long-range navigation in the mid-20th century, they noticed something strange. Many ancient landmarks sit at the intersections of old magnetic paths. Not roads, not trade routes, but natural corridors of energy, geomagnetic highs and lows, invisible yet measurable. The ancients didn't have satellites, yet somehow they built with cosmic precision. Skeptics, as always, reach for coincidence. Humans, they argue, prefer symmetry. If you build enough monuments, some will line up. But the math resists dismissal. The probability of these alignments happening by chance drops towards zero as the number of sites increases. The alignment isn't just east to west. It spirals, tracing a curve that mirrors the golden ratio when projected across the globe. You've seen that ratio before in temples carvings, the architecture of gods. The same divine fingerprint repeating on a planetary scale. So who or what was doing the mapping? You think back to Göbekli Tepe and the way its pillars mirror constellations. If the ancients were builders, maybe their true blueprint wasn't the ground beneath them, but the sky above. The Earth, after all, rotates beneath the stars. To create a global pattern that remains consistent, you'd need knowledge of both astronomy and geography, far beyond recorded history. You'd need to understand the Earth as a sphere, know its curvature, its axis, its magnetic field. Officially, humanity didn't master that until the Renaissance, and yet someone carved it into stone 10,000 years earlier. The late engineer Ivan Sanderson once proposed the idea of vile vortices, 12 points of high electromagnetic disturbance scattered evenly across the globe, including the Bermuda Triangle, Easter Island, and the Indus Valley. Ancient ruins cluster near each one. Coincidence again, or placement by design? If those vortices are real, maybe they weren't seen as dangerous at all. Maybe they were sacred nodes in a planetary energy grid harnessed by temples, pyramids, and standing stones. It sounds absurd until you remember the earlier clues. Temples tuned to specific frequencies, stones that hum, mica layers acting as insulation. The same materials reappear along those global lines, as though each monument were a capacitor, each alignment a circuit. Even the name ley lines popularized in the 1920s by Alfred Watkins might be a modern echo of something ancient. Watkins thought they marked old trade routes, but he also noticed how many of these lines connected places of worship, churches, stone circles, mounds, and shrines. If the builders followed the Earth's energy and their successors built over those same currents, then what we call coincidence might actually be inheritance. You trace another route from Stonehenge to Delphi, then to Jerusalem, Mecca, and Karnak. Once again, the pattern holds. The angle of each connection mirrors a celestial arc, aligning not just with geography, but with the rising points of key stars, Sirius, Orion's belt, the Pleiades. It's as if the builders were writing across the face of the Earth, composing a planetary hymn whose notes were lightstone and geometry. A whisper of irony curls through your thoughts. Humanity has always dreamed of gods descending from the heavens. But what if the gods built up to meet them instead? Modern satellite imaging confirms something even stranger. These alignments intersect near regions of high natural conductivity. Granite-rich formations, iron ore deposits, and underground aquifers. Energy moves more easily through such materials. If ancient architects understood this, then their sites weren't just symbolic, they were functional. Antennas, amplifiers, nodes in a system we've forgotten how to use. Some researchers propose a global telluric network, a web of earth currents that the ancients could detect through resonance magnetism or intuition. Certain tribes still practice dowsing, feeling the pull of water or metal through wooden rods. Now imagine that same sensitivity refined over millennia, guiding builders to places where the planet itself sang. But here's the detail that chills you most. The Great Circle alignment doesn't just mark Earth's surface. Extend it into space, and it crosses paths with the ecliptic, the plane of planetary orbits. The ancients didn't just map the Earth. They integrated it into a cosmic grid. Each site perhaps a receiver or transmitter, attuned not to the ground, but to the heavens. The forbidden part of these alignments isn't the geometry, it's what they imply: global coordination, deliberate planning, and knowledge that predates every known civilization. To acknowledge that would mean rewriting history itself. And so the pattern remains politely ignored, labeled pseudoscience, tucked into the margins of archaeology, where official funding doesn't reach. But the Earth remembers. Satellites reveal magnetic scars where those lines cross. Local legends speak of lights, hums, sudden energy bursts. Pilgrims report dizziness visions, strange serenity. Whatever these sites are, they're not dead. The grid still hums. You picture the builders, those vanished engineers standing beneath a night sky brighter than ours, measuring not in miles, but in harmonics. Perhaps they weren't just building temples. Perhaps they were tuning the Earth itself, aligning stone with star sky, with soil. A planetary ritual frozen in rock, waiting for someone to recognize the melody. And now, as your map fills with lines and circles, the next step becomes obvious. The alignments weren't random. They were blueprints. The sky above mirrored the Earth below. To understand the purpose of the grid, you'll have to look upward to see what constellation those ancient architects were tracing on the surface of the world. You begin to understand that every direction points upward. The stones, the alignments, the impossible geometry, all of it gestures to the same truth. The ancients were looking to the stars, not for wonder, but for instruction. What we see as myth, they might have seen as mathematics. The heavens weren't a story, they were a map. At first the idea seems poetic. Civilizations across the world worshipped the stars. Egypt's gods sailed in solar barges. The Maya built temples that echoed the cosmos. Mesopotamians charted the movements of planets like divine messengers. But when you start comparing their architectures, poetry gives way to precision. These weren't random acts of reverence, they were coordinated acts of calibration. Take the pyramids of Giza. For centuries, they've been interpreted as tombs, symbols of eternity, or grand royal statements. But then you notice something that can't be explained away by coincidence. The layout of the three Great Pyramids mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, not approximately, but with measurable accuracy. Their relative sizes match the stars' magnitudes, and the angle of their alignment matches the tilt of Orion's belt, circa 10⁵ BCE, the same date the Sphinx appears to face, directly toward the rising constellation of Leo. It's as if the entire Giza plateau was a snapshot of the night sky frozen in stone. The same pattern reappears elsewhere. In Mexico, the pyramids of Teotihuacan replicate the same Orion alignment, complete with a smaller offset structure corresponding to the faint star of Mintaka. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor Wat form a near-perfect map of the Draco constellation, calibrated to the sky's precessional position over 10,000 years ago. The builders of Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, and Chaco Canyon all built with the same obsession with the rising and setting of stars, solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles. This isn't architecture, it's astronomy etched into civilization itself. Each monument seems to function as a coordinate part of a system linking heaven and earth. And if the Earth's surface truly forms a mirror of the sky, then perhaps the builders believed that balance between the two could keep the cosmos stable, that what was above could be harmonized with what was below. Ancient texts hint at this principle again and again. The Emerald Tablet of Thoth declares, "As above, so below." The Vedic hymns describe the heavens as the reflection of the earth's sacred geometry. The Chinese called it the mandate of heaven, the invisible order that linked rulers to the stars. Every culture in its own language spoke of a cosmic mirror. But why the obsession with Orion? You begin noticing the constellation's recurrence in myth. Osiris in Egypt, the god of resurrection. The Mayans' Hunab-Ku, the galactic center represented by Orion's belt. The Dogon tribe of Mali, who somehow knew that Sirius, the bright star beside Orion, had an invisible companion star thousands of years before modern telescopes confirmed it. The Dogon say they were taught by beings from the sky, the Nommo, who descended from Sirius, and imparted the foundations of their cosmology. Mainstream anthropology dismisses it as mythic imagination. But the question lingers, why do so many cultures separated by oceans and millennia fixate on the same stars, the same patterns, the same angles of light? Perhaps the gods they described were not divine in the way we think, but cosmic in a literal sense. You look again at the numbers. The angle between the pyramids matches the angle of Orion's belt, 43.2 degrees. The Great Pyramid's orientation to true north is within 1/20th of a degree, unmatched until the invention of modern surveying equipment. Its proportions encode the value of pi, the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its diameter, and even the precessional cycle of 25,920 years, the time it takes the Earth's axis to complete one wobble. None of these are coincidences, they're calculations. And then a new possibility emerges. What if these builders weren't merely observing the stars, but communicating with them? The ancients built structures that resonate with specific frequencies, tuned to the same harmonic ratios found in orbital mechanics and sound. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers amplify vibrations between 110 Hz and 120 Hz, the same range produced by the Earth's natural resonance and certain stellar oscillations. When chanted into those chambers, create standing waves frequencies that could travel through stone and air alike. To modern physicists, it's a curiosity. To the ancients, it might have been a ritual of contact. The further you look, the deeper the connection becomes. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera features carvings that seem to depict electric discharge or plasma arcs, forms nearly identical to modern images of aurora and electromagnetic flow. The temple's ceiling doubles as a star chart showing Sirius, Orion, and precessional alignments across cycles of thousands of years. In Machu Picchu, windows align precisely with solstice sunrises. In Tiwanaku, the Gate of the Sun marks the equinox and bears engravings of celestial beings descending from above. It's no longer about worship. It's measurement, memory, and perhaps maintenance. Because something becomes evident as you map these alignments, they're not static. Every few thousand years, due to axial precession, the stars drift, and with them the earthly mirrors fall out of sync. Unless that is someone corrects them. Some sites show evidence of modification, temples, realigned markers, adjusted monuments rebuilt atop older foundations. It's as if each generation tried to recalibrate the cosmic clock, preserving a forgotten equilibrium between heaven and earth. What happens when that balance is lost? Ancient traditions are unanimous catastrophe. The flood myths, the fire from the sky, the collapse of golden ages, all coincide with astronomical cycles, especially when Orion and Sirius cross key thresholds on the horizon. It's as if the heavens themselves dictate history's rhythm. You realize now that these stones aren't just relics of the past. They're instruments in a symphony that spans epochs. Every temple, every alignment, every carved star is a note in a song humanity once understood, a song that kept heaven and earth in tune. Somewhere along the line, we forgot the melody. But if the builders carved the heavens into the earth, then they left a record that time couldn't erase. A stone sky beneath our feet, whispering the same question that started your journey: who taught them this? And more hauntingly, why did they stop? The air feels heavier here, as if you've crossed into a memory the earth itself is trying to forget. Beneath your feet, the soil hides layers of mud silt and broken stone signatures of an event so vast that it rewrote the story of humanity. Every myth, every culture, every ruin seems to whisper of it, a flood that came not to cleanse but to erase. You begin with the most famous version, the Great Flood of Genesis. A divine punishment, a man warned an ark, built a world drowned. But long before the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh told the same story, almost word for word. And even earlier, still, Sumerian tablets describe Ziusudra, the man who survived a deluge sent by angry gods. Thousands of miles away, the Aztecs speak of the Son of Water, the epoch destroyed by flood. The Greeks had Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Hindus had Manu. The Chinese had Yu the Great. Separated by oceans and ages, and yet all remembering the same thing. For centuries, scholars called it coincidence, but the ground tells a different story. Around 12 to 800 years ago, at the boundary known as the Younger Dryas, Earth's climate snapped from glacial cold to sudden warmth. Ice sheets melted, sea levels rose by over 100 meters, and something catastrophic struck the northern hemisphere. In Greenland's ice cores, a layer of nanodiamonds and soot marks that transition. Across North America, black mats of carbonized soil overlay extinct megafauna. In Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple carvings of falling comets and dying animals date precisely to that same period. Archaeologists once dismissed the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis as fringe theory. Yet year after year, the evidence grows: meltwater pulses that emptied into the oceans faster than any natural process should allow mysterious glassy spherules scattered across continents, and the sudden disappearance of cultures like the Clovis people who left their tools behind, as if frozen in mid-flight. Something happened, something big enough to erase entire civilizations and the gods they served. But the flood myths speak not just of water, but of memory. The gods walked among us, they say, until the day the sky fell. What if the deluge wasn't divine wrath, but cosmic accident, a comet impact, perhaps breaking apart over the ice caps, raining fire before melting into a world-drowning tide? The ancients wouldn't have had the words for it, only the terror. They would have seen the heavens split open and concluded that the gods themselves were ending the world. And yet, amid the destruction, the first great monuments appear. Not after centuries of recovery, but immediately, almost impossibly soon. Göbekli Tepe, built just after the flood, stands, as if to remember what the waters erased. Its pillars depict strange hybrid beings, half man, half animal, and symbols that match constellations Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Orion, all frozen in their 10,000 BCE positions. It's not the beginning of civilization, as textbooks claim. It's a reconstruction, a deliberate rebuilding of something older. The story repeats at Baalbek, where massive foundations lie buried beneath later Roman temples. Or at Tiwanaku, where lake sediments show that the city once stood at a different altitude, suggesting the ground itself shifted during ancient cataclysm. Even the Sphinx shows erosion marks more consistent with torrential rain than desert wind, implying it stood long before the Sahara dried. These are not ruins of the first builders, they're restorations of what survived. Humanity's attempt to remember the blueprints of the divine. One detail keeps surfacing in these myths: the gods' return after the flood. The Sumerians tell of the Anunnaki descending once more to teach agriculture and writing. The Egyptians say that Thoth restored order and re-established the calendar. The Inca tell of Viracocha emerging from the waters to rebuild humanity. Each culture believed knowledge had to be given back, that it was too advanced to rediscover on its own. And yet, what if the gods didn't return at all? What if it was memory itself, shards of a vanished civilization resurfacing through survivors who carried fragments of knowledge across continents? A people so old, their stories blurred into myth. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he claimed the tale came from Egyptian priests, describing a civilization destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. Modern scholars roll their eyes, but Egyptian records of floods and firestorms predate Plato by millennia. The Egyptians even measured their dynasties backward to a time they called the reign of the gods. If there truly was a civilization before the flood, technologically advanced, globally connected, perhaps even in contact with forces they called divine, then the flood was not just destruction. It was a reset. A system rebooted by disaster, wiping the slate so clean that only the stones, the myths, and the inexplicable ruins remained. The thought unsettles you. Because if that's true, then our entire history might be nothing more than the second act of a much older story. Some researchers suggest that ancient myths preserve encoded astronomy warnings written in the language of gods. The wrath of heaven, the fire serpents, the thunderstones might all describe cometary debris fields, and the cycle continues still. Modern astrophysics recognizes a 12,000-year periodicity in impact risks, meaning we are once again approaching the same cosmic rhythm that ended the last age. You pause at that. Because if the flood truly marked the fall of the divine builders, their ruins might not just be memorials, they might be warnings. Monuments built to endure the next reset, to whisper across eons that the gods were not immortal, only prepared. The silence of the ancient stones feels different now, not like absence, but like anticipation. Somewhere between the stars and the sea, the same question waits to be asked again when the flood returns. Who will be the gods then? You find yourself standing before a stone altar, its edges worn smooth by centuries of ritual. The air smells faintly metallic, like iron and dust. Somewhere in the distance, water drips in slow rhythm, echoing against the hollow space. This is not a temple meant for worship. It's a contract, a covenant between mortals and something they once believed divine. Across the world, in every cradle of civilization, these sacred bargains repeat themselves. At Göbekli Tepe, reliefs of vultures and headless men suggest rituals of offering, perhaps even sacrifice. In Egypt, priests spilled libations of wine, honey, and blood upon the altars of gods whose statues glowed in torchlight. In Mesoamerica, the pyramids of Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza served as platforms for hearts lifted to the sun, feeding the gods, who in return kept the cosmos alive. And beneath it all, a single pattern emerges: blood for life, covenant for knowledge. To modern eyes, it feels barbaric superstition at its most cruel. But when you look closer, the language of these rites changes meaning. Blood wasn't always punishment. It was communication. The ancients saw it as the carrier of power, the only earthly substance that could bridge the gap between human and divine. The covenant wasn't about obedience. It was about exchange. Life for protection. Flesh for revelation. A transaction written in red. Archaeologists have found curious consistencies in these sites. In Anatolia at Çatalhöyük, plastered skulls were painted with red ochre, the same pigment used to anoint walls of temples thousands of miles away in Jericho and Thebes. In South America, priests smeared cinnabar over mummies, symbolizing the renewal of the sun. The pigment itself, mercury sulfide, was deadly. Yet it was used everywhere, as if the ancients believed toxicity could preserve the spirit or perhaps bind it. And when you think of blood, its iron, its pulse, its magnetic field, you begin to wonder whether these rituals had more than symbolic effect. Because something strange connects the sacred sites that practiced them, measurable anomalies in the magnetic field. Sensitive instruments detect fluctuations, small but distinct, around altars, standing stones, and burial chambers. In places like Delphi, where the oracle inhaled vapors from the earth, researchers have found natural gas seepage rich in ethylene, capable of inducing trances. The ancients called it communion. Modern science calls it chemistry. But the line between the two blurs when you realize both change consciousness in the same way. The blood rites may have functioned as early forms of bioenergetic ritual, human attempts to activate or amplify natural forces within the earth. Myth remembers them as communication with gods because that's exactly what it felt like. Voices in the dark, visions from the ether, knowledge received from nowhere. You recall the carvings at Göbekli Tepe, the vultures holding spheres, the serpents curling around pillars. Many scholars see them as symbols of death and rebirth. Others whisper of something else, celestial transmission. The blood spilled beneath those carvings might not have been mere offering. It might have been ritual calibration, tuning the participants to the same frequency as the stars. It sounds poetic until you see how consistently the pattern appears. In Egypt, the opening of the mouth ceremony used drops of bull's blood to reanimate statues of gods. In India, yajna fire rituals used clarified butter and sometimes blood to feed deities manifested in flame. In South America, shamans offered their own blood through piercing, believing it opened the doorway between realms. The words differ, but the rhythm remains the same, a human channel opened through sacrifice. The modern world, of course, dismisses all of it as metaphor. But there's one problem with that. The more you study these rituals, the more they seem to encode measurable data. The ratios of offering, the orientation of altars, the timing of ceremonies with lunar or solar cycles, all display mathematical precision, as though each covenant followed a formula passed down long after the reason was forgotten. And this is where history grows uncomfortable. Because blood rites weren't random acts of faith. They were global, coordinated traditions performed by cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. The Aztecs and Sumerians both believed the gods first gave humanity life through the mixing of blood and clay. The Egyptians and Hebrews shared the belief that divine contracts were sealed with sacrifice. Even in prehistoric Europe, ancient stone circles reveal stains and residues consistent with animal or human blood. Coincidence or inheritance? You recall how in the last section, the flood reset civilization. If survivors carried fragments of the old world's knowledge, then perhaps these covenants were not acts of primitive superstition, but echoes of an earlier understanding, an attempt to remember how to reach the beings they once served. The blood was not the focus. It was the key. In the Book of Enoch, a text buried for centuries, the fallen watchers teach humans metallurgy, enchantment, and the cutting of roots, the manipulation of natural forces. Their punishment, eternal separation from heaven. Yet their knowledge survived encoded in ritual and architecture. The covenant wasn't about faith, it was about forbidden inheritance. And maybe that's why so many ruins bear marks of deliberate destruction. The temples of Baal, the ziggurats of Ur, the sacrificial chambers of Teotihuacan all show evidence of being ritually buried or burned, as if their builders feared what those places could still do. Perhaps the covenants were broken not by rebellion, but by regret. You step closer to the altar again. It's cold even in the warmth of the afternoon. The stone hums faintly, like a tuning fork still resonating after millennia. You wonder if some trace remains, an energy sealed in the stone by generations of worshippers who believed their blood could awaken gods. Somewhere deep inside, an uneasy thought rises, what if it still can? The deeper you travel into the ruins, the more you begin to recognize a kind of handwriting, an architectural dialect that repeats itself across continents like an accent that refuses to fade even when the language changes. The world's oldest monuments may differ in shape, scale, and purpose, but beneath those differences lies something unmistakable. A recurring mark, a pattern, a signature. You first notice it at Pumapunku, where immense blocks of andesite interlock with such precision that not even a razor blade can fit between them. Each corner turns at right angles, so exact they might as well have been machined. The site's most distinctive feature, however, is the H block, a shape that appears again thousands of miles away in the Gate of the Sun, and then again in Egypt's Valley Temple of Khafra, in the trilithon gateways of Baalbek, and the lintel stones of Stonehenge. The same configuration, two vertical supports, one horizontal lintel, emerges everywhere, as if the ancient world had access to a shared architectural blueprint. The trilithon pattern, as archaeologists call it, is usually dismissed as structural necessity. A simple way to build a doorway before the invention of arches. But necessity doesn't explain the repetition of proportions, the identical angles, or the near-perfect ratios between pillar height and crossbeam width. The pattern persists long after new technologies appeared that rendered it obsolete. Why cling to an outdated design unless it held symbolic weight? Some scholars argue that the trilithon represented a cosmic portal, an opening between the worlds of gods and men. Others suggest it symbolized the horizon where heaven and earth meet. But as you compare site after site, a more unsettling idea forms. What if it wasn't symbolic at all? What if it was literal, a device, or at least a component of one? You recall the great trilithon of Baalbek, 3 stones each weighing over 800 tons, stacked with impossible precision atop a megalithic terrace. No known ancient culture had the means to lift them, and yet they were placed perfectly. The Romans later built their temple of Jupiter over these stones almost as though they wanted to claim credit, or to hide what was beneath. In Peru, the Gate of the Sun stands alone, carved from a single slab of stone, its lintel covered with strange reliefs that resemble circuitry more than decoration. The central figure holds twin rods or staffs surrounded by radiating lines like electrical arcs. Engineers who have studied the carvings describe them as eerily symmetrical, suggestive of design templates rather than art. The local legend calls it a portal frozen open, a doorway through which gods once passed before it was sealed. Coincidence, maybe. But then you start noticing how the dimensions of these structures often align with astronomical and mathematical constants pf and the square root of 2 values that would not be formally defined until millennia later. It's as though someone left a mathematical fingerprint across civilizations. The same fingerprint appears in smaller details too. The polygonal masonry of Cusco fits with the basalt walls of Jerusalem, which echo the basalt cyclopean foundations of Mycenae. The blocks curve inward in identical convex patterns, distributing seismic stress efficiently, an engineering method rediscovered only in the modern era. Yet these ancient builders, supposedly unconnected, somehow all knew the trick. You begin to see these marks not as random coincidences, but as continuity, a lineage of builders who inherited a craft from an unknown source. Perhaps survivors of the flood, carrying fragments of divine technique, rebuilding in the image of what once was. One recurring symbol stands out: the so-called Gate of the Sun motif, 2 vertical pillars joined by a lintel always oriented toward a celestial event. In Egypt, it frames the rising sun during the equinox. In Peru, it aligns with the solstice. In Malta's megalithic temples, the same shape opens toward the constellation Orion, the same one mirrored in the pyramids of Giza. Across cultures, the meaning seems to converge: a threshold, a moment when the heavens touch the earth. But there's another layer, a subtler one, that archaeologists seldom mention. Embedded within the proportions of these gates and trilithons are acoustic resonances. When measured, the spaces between pillars often correspond to frequencies between 90 and 120 Hz, the same low humming range detected in the chambers of the Great Pyramid and the Hypogeum of Malta. Sound behaves differently there. It lingers, folds, amplifies. Step between those stones, and your voice vibrates in your chest like a second heartbeat. Some researchers think these effects were intentional, that the builders designed the geometry to manipulate vibration, perhaps as part of ritual or communication. If so, the gates might have served a dual purpose: symbolic openings for the spirit and literal resonators for sound or energy. The ancients may have understood something about frequency that modern science is only beginning to rediscover, that resonance, vibration, and geometry are intertwined forces capable of shaping matter itself. That's when a realization hits you: the builder's signature isn't a single mark, it's a triad: geometry, alignment, and resonance. Wherever those 3 converge, the divine ruins stand. It's the same equation written in stone across the world. And just as you begin to accept that another pattern surfaces, the builder's marks, the carved notches, The U-shaped grooves, the small circles etched into stone blocks, often appear on corners, as if to guide the assembly of something larger. They don't resemble ornamentation or chisel tests. They look like reference marks, industrial shorthand, for alignment and fit. Some engineers liken them to the registration marks used in modern machine parts, meaning whoever built these structures thought in modular systems, not mere artistry. This raises a question that feels almost dangerous to ask. Were these ruins part of a single global construction project, one that spanned epochs? The idea sounds absurd until you trace the geometry again. The trilithon's gates and megalithic platforms line up along the same longitudinal arcs, forming a vast geodesic grid, a planetary lattice. Not exact, but close enough to suggest intention. A world built on resonance, proportion, and stone. The pattern beneath your feet feels suddenly alive like a pulse running through time. The ancients didn't just build for the gods, they built with them. The signature isn't human. It's instruction. And you start to wonder, as the evening wind moves softly through the ruins, whether these stones were ever meant to be understood by us at all, or whether they were messages left for the ones who would come after. You return to the ruins with new eyes, searching not for beauty or scale, but for language. Every groove, every symbol, every inexplicable mark could be a word in a language the earth itself remembers. If the builder's signature was their handwriting, this, the patterns, numbers, and alignments, might be their message. At first glance, these markings seem decorative or random. But when mapped, something remarkable happens. Ratios emerge. Numbers recur. Across the world's oldest structures, from the pyramids of Egypt to Teotihuacan, from Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, a common mathematical rhythm pulses beneath the surface. Distances between major features often align with sacred constants. The ratio 1:1.618, the golden section appearing in temple facades and chamber widths. Angles reflecting P not as abstract numbers, but encoded in architecture. Repeated use of 72, 108, and 432 numbers that resonate through Hindu cosmology, Sumerian calendars, and the precession of the equinoxes. You begin plotting these numbers on a timeline, and they don't merely repeat, they connect. The ancient sites align like notes on a global scale, each one positioned as though to preserve a piece of a formula. It's as if the earth was being tuned, and these ruins were the tuning forks. Archaeologists call these numerical repetitions coincidence. They argue the ancients simply favored symmetry, or used local measurements that coincidentally overlap. But coincidence has limits. Too many perfect alignments begin to feel deliberate. Take the Great Pyramid, its perimeter divided by its height equals 2p, meaning it encodes the relationship between a circle and its radius. Now compare it to Teotihuacan, whose main avenue mirrors the same ratio when scaled down, a ratio also found in the Angkor Wat complex and the Temple of Solomon as described in Scripture. Cultures separated by oceans, centuries, and belief systems, all working with the same hidden mathematics. In Mesopotamia, ancient tablets known as the Plimpton 322 reveal a grasp of trigonometry 3,000 years before Pythagoras. The Babylonians calculated distances using base 60 mathematics, the same base system that defines our modern measure of time and angles. Their units of measure, cubits, rods, stadia, recur mysteriously in Egyptian and Mesoamerican structures. Did they inherit this knowledge, or were they all students of the same forgotten teacher? The deeper you go, the clearer the code becomes. At Göbekli Tepe, the T-shaped pillars stand in concentric circles that correspond to star constellations as they appeared 11,600 years ago, the exact end of the last ice age. One carving on Pillar 43 depicts a vulture, a scorpion, and a sun symbol, an apparent map of the sky at a single moment in time. Researchers from Edinburgh University confirmed that this carving precisely matches a date 10,950 BCE, almost the same year the Younger Dryas cataclysm reshaped the planet. That's when you realize something terrifying. The builders didn't just encode numbers, they encoded time. Ancient myths around the world speak of cycles of creation and destruction, of golden ages rising and falling in rhythm with the stars. The Mayans called them suns. The Hindus called them yugas. The Egyptians Zep Tepi the first time. Each describes not a single origin, but a pattern, a clock wound by cosmic forces. Now imagine if that clock wasn't myth, but mathematics, if the ancients used geometry to track the long precession of Earth's axis, a 26,000-year wobble that shifts the heavens themselves. The ruins aligned with solstices and equinoxes may have been observatories, not just for seasons, but for epochs. The code of stone may have been a warning system, because every time the cycle completes, catastrophe follows: floods, fire, ice. Civilizations fall, knowledge disappears, and the survivors begin again. What we call progress may only be recovery, the slow rediscovery of what was once known. And if that's true, then the divine in these ruins isn't about gods descending from the sky. It's about humanity remembering its own forgotten godlike past. You notice one more clue, one small, almost invisible feature shared by dozens of sacred sites. The placement of humming chambers, small enclosed cavities where sound amplifies beyond reason. The frequencies they produce match those used in modern harmonic resonance experiments, capable of moving sand, water, even metal dust into geometric patterns. The ancients didn't just write in stone, they sang in it. Every resonance chamber, every carved frequency mark, every spiral pattern etched into basalt was part of the same code, a code that speaks not in words, but in vibration. Energy, geometry, and intention woven together, you begin to understand the scale of what you're uncovering. The ruins were never merely temples or tombs. They were instruments, machines built to remember, to harmonize with the planet, and perhaps to awaken those who could still hear their song. The gods may not have left behind scripture, but they left us stone that hums when touched by the right tone. And maybe that's the true message of the code, that divinity was never lost. It only waits for those who can listen closely enough to decode it. You've followed the marks left in stone, but what happens when those marks begin to speak? Not metaphorically, but literally, as lines of text inked on clay papyrus and parchment whispering of knowledge too precise to belong to their supposed age. These are the forbidden blueprints, ancient writings that seem to record technology, cosmology, and architecture centuries, even millennia before humanity should have known them. The trail begins in Sumer, cradle of civilization, where the Sumerian king list reads less like history and more like a cosmic ledger. Kings ruled not for decades or generations, but for tens of thousands of years, their reigns measured in sar and ner units of celestial time. Before the flood, it claims the kingship descended from heaven. Scholars interpret that as poetic myth, yet the precision of the numbers, the careful ratios between reign lengths, the repeating multiples of 3,600 feels methodical, like someone wanted the math to be remembered even if the meaning was lost. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic gods are described designing the heavens like engineers drafting a plan. He set the constellations in their places, he measured the foundations of the earth. The verbs are technical measure mark, fix, the same language used by surveyors and builders. When those lines are compared to Egyptian creation hymns or to the Hermetic corpus, the parallels are uncanny, divine beings shaping order through measurement, geometry, and proportion. It's almost as if the ancients believed the act of building was divine, that constructing a temple wasn't just worship, it was imitation. Each blueprint mirrored the architecture of the heavens. You trace the pattern into Egypt. On the walls of Edfu Temple, inscriptions speak of the primeval mound, the first place to rise from the floodwaters, where the gods established the plans of all things. The word they use, Seshat, refers both to the goddess of writing and to the act of setting out a temple's ground plan with rope and rod. She's often shown measuring stars and recording dimensions, as though architecture itself was a sacred equation. And then there's the emerald tablet attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, said to contain the formula for understanding the unity between heaven and earth. As above, so below. The phrase has become cliché, but when read through the lens of sacred geometry, it transforms. Every proportion in a temple, every ratio between base and height, every alignment to the stars, all of it expresses that principle in physical form. But the most unsettling thing isn't that these texts exist, it's that they agree. Cultures supposedly isolated by oceans and epochs echo the same instructions: build according to celestial law, measure as the gods measured, preserve the pattern. Even the Maya Popol Vuh describes creator beings designing the first world with cords and markers, setting out the 4 directions before populating it with life. So who wrote the first draft? A controversial theory once circulated among early archaeologists, quietly dismissed, never fully disproven, that all sacred architecture originated from a single mother plan, a set of divine specifications lost in prehistory. The few who pursued it noticed that blueprints for ancient cities often began with a cross, a point of intersection representing the axis mundi, or world center. From that point, everything radiated outward in perfect ratios. Babylon, Thebes, Machu Picchu, Angkor, each was anchored around a symbolic navel of the world. If this was myth, it was an oddly consistent one. You remember the serpent motif from earlier, coiling through temple art, winding between myths like a thread. Here it resurfaces as something more abstract, a waveform. In old Hermetic diagrams, the serpent curls around pillars labeled with letters and numbers, forming a sine wave. It's as if someone thousands of years ago encoded the concept of frequency, the same resonance that makes the ancient chambers hum. And buried within the Hermetic texts lies a hint of something even stranger, a process called the recollection of the first builders. It speaks of divine beings who, before departing, left behind tablets inscribed not with words, but with measure. Those who rediscovered them, the text says, became as gods, knowing the harmony of the spheres. Modern researchers dismiss this as alchemical allegory, a poetic metaphor for spiritual awakening. But when you compare those lines with fragments from the Book of Thoth and the Gnostic Apocryphon of John, they share a core narrative: forbidden knowledge passed to mortals, guarded by priests, hidden when empires fell. The Church Fathers later called such writings heresy, not because they contradicted faith, but because they blurred the boundary between divine and human. They implied that gods and men shared the same tools, the same knowledge, the same language of creation. That heresy, ironically, might have been true. You think back to Göbekli Tepe pillars, arranged with celestial precision long before writing was invented. Maybe writing didn't precede architecture. Maybe architecture was the first language, a universal syntax carved into stone instead of ink. If that's the case, then the forbidden blueprints aren't just texts in forgotten languages, they're the ruins themselves. The temples, the pyramids, the ziggurats, the dolmens. Each one a chapter in a manual for rebuilding a world lost to flood and fire. And perhaps the reason that knowledge was hidden, burned, buried, or rewritten as myth is because it was too potent. Knowledge that could create gods could also unmake them. You close the tablet, feeling the echo of something old pressing behind your eyes, a memory that isn't yours, of architects who built to remember eternity. Somewhere beneath the dust, the next blueprint waits. Not written in ink this time, but etched into the very shape of the earth itself. You've traced the knowledge, the signatures, the codes, all the evidence that should have rewritten history. And yet when you look for the physical proof, the trail suddenly goes dark. Artifacts vanish. Excavation records stop mid-sentence. Scholars withdraw papers. Museums quietly remove exhibits. It's as if the past is being erased in real time. This is where the mystery deepens, not into myth, but into silence. It begins innocently enough. A mislabeled artifact here, a missing crate there. You read about a stone disc found in China's Bayan Kara Ula caves in 1938, perfectly circular, etched with spiral grooves resembling a phonograph record. The expedition catalogued hundreds of them. Then, nothing. No follow-up, no official photographs, no display. The discs reportedly vanished into university storage awaiting further study. Some called them hoaxes. Others whispered they recorded an alien genealogy, the story of gods who fell to earth and never left. In Peru, a similar story unfolds. Locals in Ica tell of smooth black stones engraved with images of humans coexisting with dinosaurs performing surgery, gazing through telescopes. In the 1960s, Dr. Javier Cabrera devoted his life to collecting them, more than 10,000, claiming they preserved the science of a forgotten race. After his death, the collection was quietly seized and locked away. Officially, they were dismissed as forgeries. Unofficially, no one seems willing to test them again. Then there are the cases that seem less like loss and more like deliberate removal. In the 1920s, British explorers in Iraq uncovered what appeared to be mechanical parts among Sumerian ruins, cogs rods, and a corroded copper tube. The find never appeared in public archives. A decade later, the Antikythera mechanism was discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, proving ancient technology was far more advanced than imagined. Yet somehow, the Iraqi find had already disappeared, as though someone had anticipated the connection and erased it preemptively. It's tempting to blame incompetence politics or the chaos of war. But when patterns repeat, when missing artifacts align with discoveries that could alter the accepted timeline, the explanation starts to fray. In 1945, at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a trove of ancient texts was found, Gnostic Gospels describing creation not as divine command, but as cosmic engineering. Among them were passages about the builders before time and the architects of flame. For a brief moment, scholars buzzed. Then the manuscripts were sealed in controlled archives, accessible only to a handful of researchers. Official translations appeared carefully sanitized, their more radical passages marked as interpretive ambiguities. You sense a strange déjà vu, the same pattern that buried the Hermetic scrolls, the same that dismissed the Book of Enoch, until fragments surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Each time ancient voices hint at beings who built before humanity, the evidence conveniently dissolves into obscurity. And then you find yourself staring at a letter dated 1957, Vatican City, archived privately but quoted in whispers by fringe historians. It references objects of uncertain provenance recovered from pre-flood strata and recommends transfer to restricted ecclesiastical custody. The recipient's name is redacted. The sender's signature, however, is legible: Cardinal Ottaviani, head of the Holy Office, the same institution once known as the Inquisition. You sit back realizing how often sacred and academic institutions have collaborated in secrecy. Museums are filled with blank tags and unlisted storerooms, non-displayed items that outnumber public exhibits 20 to 1. What's hidden there? Pottery fragments, yes. Broken tools, sure. But also whisper-it anomalous artifacts that don't fit their supposed era. Tools made of alloys unknown to ancient metallurgy. Spheres that balance perfectly on every side. Microscopic carvings visible only under modern magnification. It's not just Western institutions either. In 1994, Chinese archaeologists unearthed a set of metallic pipes embedded in Mount Baigong, some running deep into the rock. Radiocarbon dating of surrounding sediments suggested they predated known civilization. The Chinese Academy of Sciences quietly closed the site, citing environmental protection. When researchers returned, the entrance was sealed. You start to see a motive forming, one older than politics: preservation of a narrative. Humanity's sense of self depends on the idea of linear progress, from stone to bronze to iron to silicon. To accept the existence of lost technologies, vanished builders, or divine engineers would collapse that comforting timeline. It would mean we are not the pinnacle of civilization, but perhaps its reboot. There's irony in that. The institutions sworn to preserve truth may have buried it to protect meaning. It's easier to believe in miracles than to admit to forgotten machinery. Easier to worship gods than to accept they might have been predecessors, flawed, powerful, and mortal. And maybe that's the real forbidden knowledge. Not that the gods existed, but that they died, and that humanity inherited their ruins. A priest can defend a faith, a scholar can defend a theory, but neither can defend a truth that unites both, that what we call divine and what we call scientific may be the same thing remembered in two tongues. You recall the hum of the chambers, the geometry of the temples, the mathematics inscribed in myth. Each discovery brought you closer to a revelation. But now you stand at the edge of the map, staring into the void where all the evidence should be. The archives are locked. The artifacts are missing. The witnesses are gone. And in that silence, one question echoes louder than any who benefits from forgetting. You arrive in Rome expecting sunlight and history, but it's the shadows that matter here. Beneath the polished marble and frescoed ceilings lies a world no tourist ever sees, the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, better known as the Vatican Secret Archives. Its name alone invites myths. But the truth is stranger. This is no mythic dungeon. It's an underground empire of memory stretching for more than 85 kilometers of shelving, storing documents that chronicle 2 millennia of human belief, heresy, and control. You're not the first to wonder what's locked inside. Officially, the Church insists the archive isn't secret at all. The Latin secretum simply means private. Yet the privacy here is absolute. Only a few thousand files have ever been publicly viewed, and those only after careful vetting. The rest remains sealed, catalogued, but unseen, guarded more tightly than gold. Inside, they say, lie papal correspondences, royal confessions, inquisitorial records, astronomical charts. And perhaps, if rumor is mercy, the evidence of a far older world the Church could never explain. You pause before an old engraving of the Vatican Library's founding in 1475, and the air feels heavier. The archivists call themselves custodians of truth. But what if they're also its jailers? Some scholars suspect the secrecy began not with Christianity, but with what it inherited. When the Roman Empire adopted the faith, it absorbed more than territory, it absorbed knowledge. Pagan temples were emptied, their scrolls taken. Gnostic texts were burned or translated under supervision. The old mystery schools of Egypt and Greece disappeared, their teachings surviving only in fragments folded into early Christian mysticism. The Vatican may not have created the cover-up, it simply inherited it. There's a letter from the 9th century seldom mentioned, never officially confirmed, describing an inventory of pre-Christian relics stored beneath the Lateran Palace. Among them a cube of unmelting metal, a disc inscribed with the measures of the heavens, and a map showing the world before the waters. The phrasing is vague, poetic even, but its tone suggests something more than myth. Whatever those items were, they vanished from later inventories. Then there's the persistent rumor of the chronovisor, an alleged device built in the 1950s by Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and musicologist. He claimed to have constructed, under Vatican supervision, a machine that could view scenes from the past, a kind of temporal telescope. He even described watching the crucifixion through it. His notes were confiscated after his death, and the Vatican denied the project's existence, but several of his collaborators later hinted that Ernetti had based the device on ancient specifications recovered from restricted texts. If true, it suggests the Church possessed or at least believed in blueprints left by the so-called divine engineers. You think of Section 15, the Hermetic Scrolls, the Emerald Tablet, the principle of as above, so below. Hermeticism and early Christianity once overlapped. Priests and alchemists both searched for the architecture of creation. What if the Vatican's fear has never been of demons, but of rediscovery? If humans ever proved that divine creation could be replicated, that sacred geometry and ancient technology could recreate miracles, faith as an institution would collapse overnight. And yet whispers persist. In the early 20th century, a Jesuit archaeologist working in Ethiopia reportedly found metallic tablets near Lake Tana, etched with symbols identical to those in Mesopotamian artifacts. His findings never reached publication. The mission was abruptly recalled, and the artifacts repatriated to Rome for safekeeping. Decades later, a letter from a Vatican librarian surfaced, describing plates of unknown origin sealed in the restricted section near the Hall of Maps. The wording was deliberately opaque, but the implication was clear: something ancient, something unclassifiable rests in those vaults. Inside the archives, temperature and humidity are controlled with monastic precision. The silence is so dense you can hear the ticking of your own pulse. Visitors describe a sensation not of awe, but of surveillance, as if the past itself is watching to see what you take. Among the rumors most persistent is one involving a codex known as Liber Primus Aetatis, the first book of the age. Allegedly written in a pre-Latin script, it describes beings who descended before dawn and walked the rivers of glass. Some Vatican insiders dismiss it as allegory for angels, but if you compare those lines with Sumerian references to the Anunna, the Shining Ones, who taught mankind the arts of civilization, the parallels are chilling. Could the Church be safeguarding not theology, but testimony? You find a curious paradox in all this. If the Vatican truly possessed proof of a pre-human civilization, why not destroy it? Why keep it at all? Perhaps they fear losing it, or perhaps they don't understand it. Maybe deep down, the archivists hope that one day humanity will be ready to read those documents without unraveling. In 2019, Pope Francis quietly renamed the archive from Secretum to Apostolicum, a subtle attempt to soften its image. But the change felt cosmetic. The gates remain closed. The walls still hum with guarded electricity. What lies inside remains unseen, untouched, unspoken. As you leave the imagined corridors of the archive, you can almost hear it. The whisper of parchment, the flutter of unseen pages, the quiet pulse of truth restrained. Somewhere in that labyrinth of forbidden shelves, a fragment waits. A drawing, a coordinate, a sentence scrawled by someone who remembered when the gods still walked the earth. And perhaps that's the cruelest secret of all. The Church didn't invent silence. It just gave it a home. By now the investigation has wound itself into a coil, and perhaps that's fitting. The serpent, that ancient symbol winding through every civilization's art text and temple, is no mere decoration. It's a message, one you've seen repeated too many times to ignore. From the coiled Naga of Angkor Wat to the feathered Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, from the Ouroboros on Egyptian papyri to the serpent staff of Hermes, the same image reappears across continents and millennia. The question is no longer whether the ancients shared the symbol, it's why. At first glance, the serpent embodies opposites: creation and destruction, wisdom and deceit, life and death. In the book of Genesis, it tempts humanity toward forbidden knowledge. In Egypt, it guards the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. In Mesoamerica, it's the celestial bridge, a god who flies. But if you strip away mythology and look at the symbol through a modern lens, something else emerges. Everywhere the serpent appears, it's bound to motion, energy, and transmission. It winds around, staffs, encircles globes, and rises in twin strands, like a signal rising through space. Ancient Indian texts call it Kundalini, the coiled energy resting at the base of the spine, which when awakened spirals upward in a double helix toward enlightenment. In Greek art, the staff of Hermes, the caduceus, shows the same twin serpent's wings spread orb above. The same shape centuries apart, mirrored perfectly in the double helix of modern DNA. Is it coincidence or memory? You trace the symbol through geography and it becomes a map. The serpent's trail links some of the world's most enigmatic ruins: Angkor Wat, Chichen Itza, Giza, Easter Island, all arranged along what researchers call the Belt of the Serpent, a continuous line curving across the globe near 30 degrees latitude. When plotted on a sphere, the line forms a perfect great circle, a geodesic. The same geometrical precision you saw in Section 9, where global temple grids, aligned with impossible accuracy, returns here like a hidden chord, repeating in a symphony. The ancients may not have drawn maps the way we do, but they built them in stone through alignment. The serpent then might not just be a creature or a metaphor. It could be a pathway, a symbol of an energy network wrapping around the Earth. Modern geophysicists call these lines telluric currents, subtle electromagnetic flows running beneath the crust, strongest along fault lines and mineral belts. Sacred sites often sit directly atop these energetic nodes. Coincidence again? You recall how the temples resonated, how certain chambers hummed at frequencies that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. Now imagine hundreds of such sites, all connected through the planet's natural magnetic web, pulsing like neurons in a global brain. The serpent would not be myth. It would be a model of Earth's living current, the same force the ancients sought to channel through stone. Ancient priests and astronomers may have represented this energy through the serpent's body and the stars through its scales. In fact, many star constellations bear serpentine forms: Draco coiling around the North Pole, serpens in Ophiuchus's hand, Hydra stretching across the southern sky. On Angkor Wat's bas-reliefs, the serpent's body is not just an ornament, it's a calendar marking the procession of equinoxes. The heads represent epochs, the coils celestial cycles. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, sunlight slides down the pyramid steps in a moving shadow shaped like a serpent, the descent of Quetzalcoatl. But the illusion lasts only a few minutes twice a year at the exact intersection of cosmic and terrestrial geometry. You can't stage that by accident. The builders knew where the sun would stand, where the earth would tilt, where the shadow would crawl. They were painting with light encoding motion in stillness. That pattern, a serpent made of light and shadow, recurs from Egypt to Cambodia. The temples of Angkor are shaped to mirror the constellation Draco, the celestial serpent at dawn, on the day of their foundation. In Egyptian myth, that same Draco was the cosmic guardian of the northern axis, the immortal watcher around which the heavens turned. To the Maya, it was a sky river. To the Chinese, a dragon road. Different tongues, same story. So you ask yourself, were they all worshipping serpents or tracking one? In modern astrophysics, the Milky Way itself winds across the sky like a serpent, a luminous river of stars. Ancient cultures everywhere built myths around it. The rainbow serpent, the world dragon, the bridge between realms. To follow the serpent was to follow the stars, to map the heavens onto Earth. The same impulse that carved star maps into temple floors might have shaped the planetary network of ruins. The serpent then is not just symbol or energy, it is connection. The ancient expression of a truth modern science only rediscovered, that all things are linked through invisible threads of frequency and form. There's a strange irony in that. In the West, the serpent became a symbol of evil, the deceiver, the fallen. But to older traditions, it represented wisdom itself, the power that awakens, renews, and regenerates. Maybe that's what the story in Eden was warning about, that the serpent offers not destruction, but knowledge too potent for comfort. As you follow the serpent's path from ruin to ruin, constellation to constellation, it feels less like a myth and more like a memory of how the world once worked. A system of sacred energy, a planetary architecture guided by geometry and resonance. And if the ancients encoded this symbol everywhere, perhaps it wasn't just to remind us of what they knew. Perhaps it was to warn us that one day when we forgot the serpent's song, the network would fall silent, and so would we. You descend now not metaphorically, but literally. The next step in the investigation leads beneath the surface into tunnels carved so deep and precise that they seem less dug than designed. Across continents, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia all left the same feature beneath their sacred ruins, networks of chambers, tunnels, and corridors built in silence with no clear purpose and no clear explanation of how. At Derinkuyu in Turkey, entire underground cities stretch for miles, complete with ventilation shafts, water wells, and even stone doors that could seal entire levels shut. The precision suggests engineering knowledge far beyond its supposed age. Yet the same architectural fingerprints appear beneath the pyramids of Giza, beneath Teotihuacan, and beneath the temples of the Andes. Everywhere the divine was said to descend, tunnels awaited below. Archaeologists for centuries assumed these were shelters, refugees from war, or religious sanctuaries. But as excavation deepened, the pattern changed. Many of these tunnels align not with geography, but with astronomy. Subterranean passages run in straight lines toward points on the horizon where the sun or stars rise on key celestial dates. Solstices, equinoxes, or the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star of rebirth. Even underground, the builders seem to be following the heavens. You stand now inside one of these spaces, the air heavy, the silence absolute. Your flashlight beam dances across walls of stone smoothed to mirror polish. In some chambers, the rock is fused as if touched by heat, so intense it liquefied the surface, impossible with the primitive tools attributed to the builders. The deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. Carvings shift from crude to impossible precision. The stones grow larger, tighter, heavier, as if you're traveling backward through time toward the original core of something ancient built when the gods still walked the earth. And in nearly every culture, the myths agree, the gods came from below as often as they came from above. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were said to dwell in the Abzu, the deep waters beneath the earth. The Egyptians believed in the Duat, a hidden realm of tunnels and gates through which the soul journeyed after death. The Greeks told of Hades not merely a place of punishment, but a domain of knowledge and initiation. The Maya spoke of Xibalba, the underworld of the lords of creation accessed through caves that still exist today, echoing with ancient murals and the smell of incense burned for unseen rulers. You begin to see the pattern. The underworld was never simply a metaphor for death. It was a system, an architecture of descent, through which initiates moved not to die, but to remember. The same way the pyramids mirrored the heavens, the tunnels mirrored the depths, two halves of a single map. Then there's the most disturbing layer of evidence, the one that archaeology hesitates to address. Beneath certain sites, instruments have detected voids, vast, perfect cavities untouched by tools or collapsed geometrically precise and positioned in relation to the surface temples. Beneath the Great Pyramid, for instance, muon scans revealed a massive chamber above the Grand Gallery, a void aligned perfectly with the central axis. Beneath the Sphinx, seismic studies show hollow corridors that run toward the Nile. And in the Andes, near Tiwanaku, magnetic anomalies suggest the presence of enormous subterranean hollows too regular to be natural. Why would ancient builders go to such lengths to bury their most advanced structures? What were they hiding beneath the sacred ground? A few ancient texts hint at an answer. In the emerald tablets attributed to Thoth, the god describes chambers beneath the earth, where knowledge was preserved against the coming of the flood. Knowledge of how to raise the stones, align the stars, and command the light. The parallels with other traditions are striking. The Dead Sea Scrolls mention the Cave of Treasures. The Zohar speaks of vaults of wisdom sealed under holy mountains. In India, the Naga serpent beings were said to guard their wisdom in jeweled cities beneath the surface, invisible to the uninitiated. Each version points to the same idea that the earth itself was once a library, and that its pages were written in stone. In modern geological terms, these tunnels sometimes follow fault lines rich in minerals like quartz or magnetite materials known to conduct or amplify electromagnetic fields. That can't be accidental. Some researchers propose that the builders were tapping into the planet's natural energy grid, creating underground resonators that worked in harmony with surface temples. When the sun struck the upper structures, vibrations would echo through the tunnels, activating frequencies that could be felt, maybe even harnessed. It sounds fantastical until you remember that every ancient site you've studied so far, from Giza to Angkor, vibrated at measurable frequencies. The earth itself hums, and the ancients somehow heard the song. But if the underground cities, vaults, and passageways were part of this planetary system, if they formed the hidden half of a network that stretched across continents, then one question looms above all others: who built them first? Because the deeper you dig, the older the stone becomes. And the oldest tunnels don't show signs of primitive beginnings. They start at perfection. It's as if humanity's first steps into architecture began not with trial and error, but with mastery, a mastery inherited, not discovered. Maybe that's why the ancients said their knowledge came from the gods. Not because gods handed it down, but because they found it already waiting beneath their feet. The ruins of the divine may not all stand above ground. Some still lie sleeping in the dark, humming softly beneath us, waiting for the right vibration to wake them once again. You return to the surface, blinking against the light. But the question from below clings to you like dust. If the earth was a library, what power was it meant to preserve? The next step leads you not into the stone, but into the invisible, the field that hums beneath every ruin, threading one sacred site to another like the veins of a buried machine. The ancients called it the breath of the world. Today we might call it energy. You begin where the patterns converge, the old idea of ley lines. Those vast straight paths connecting monuments, temples, and standing stones across continents. Archaeologists dismiss them as coincidence, but coincidence doesn't hum when you walk along it. Sensitive instruments, and sometimes even compass needles, behave strangely on these lines. At Avebury, compasses twitch. At Nazca, static crackles faintly through the air. In Egypt, deep beneath the Sphinx, magnetic readings spike sharply, as if the ground still remembers what once flowed through it. You picture it as a network, not metaphorical, but physical, pulsing through the bedrock of the world. Along these ancient corridors, energy rises and falls with the shifting sun, the pull of the moon, the breathing of the planet itself. You imagine the temples as transformers, built not to worship the gods, but to speak with them in resonance. This isn't fantasy. There are measurable traces. Granite blocks in ancient temples, rich in quartz and feldspar, can generate piezoelectric currents under pressure or vibration. The Great Pyramid's inner chambers, composed almost entirely of granite, would have thrummed when sound or seismic energy passed through them. In places like Malta's hypogeum, low-frequency tones create standing waves that affect human brain activity. You could almost say these temples were instruments not to be played with hands, but with the planet itself. You remember the tunnels from the previous section, the ones lined with magnetite and quartz, the subterranean veins. They form the counterpart to the surface network. Together they behave like a circuit. Above stone captures light. Below stone channels vibration. The earth becomes a single global resonator, humming softly at the frequency of creation myths. The ancients seem to understand this intuitively. The Chinese built their cities along dragon lines, mapping Qi, the life force of the earth. The Incas spoke of seques, invisible threads, linking temples to Cusco, the navel of the world. In India, temples mark the nadis of the earth's subtle body, cosmic meridians, connecting heaven and soil. Even in medieval Europe, churches rose along the same alignments where earlier stone circles had stood, as if each generation rediscovered a fragment of the map and rebuilt atop it. A faint pattern begins to emerge. These were not random sacred sites. They were nodes, part of an older planetary infrastructure that humanity later inherited without understanding. You wonder whether this is why so many ancient myths describe gods descending in fire or lightning. Not divine fury, but discharge an expression of power released through the system when it was whole. Still, skeptics roll their eyes. They say there's no proof of such a network, no ancient engineers plugging cosmic sockets into the crust of the earth. And yet across the ruins, you find the same architectural signatures, the same angles, the same use of quartz, the same obsession with exact orientation to cardinal points and solstices. Coincidence becomes choreography. Imagine standing in the middle of the Great Pyramid just after midnight thousands of years ago. No electric lights, no hum of machinery, only silence and the earth itself pulsing faintly beneath your feet. Now picture a sound, a single sustained tone, the same frequency found in the chambers of Malta, the same resonance discovered at Tiwanaku. That sound vibrates the stone, which vibrates the quartz, which generates current. Multiply that effect across thousands of sites, each precisely aligned along planetary axes, and what do you have? A global circuit of intention, a power grid of prayer. Even the word temple betrays this. From the Latin templum, meaning a space cut or marked out for observing the heavens. The temple was never a building, it was a calibration. One particularly curious site, the Osirian at Abydos, may hold the key. Its megalithic chambers are surrounded by deep trenches that would have filled with water from the Nile. The structure is not a tomb, despite the efforts of early archaeologists to label it one. Instead, it appears to be a hydraulic resonator. When the floodwaters rose, they would have created low-frequency oscillations that reverberated through the granite pillars, precisely the kind of mechanism capable of generating electromagnetic charge. A similar principle might apply to Tiwanaku's sun gate in Bolivia. Its carvings depict rays and conduits, and the stone itself is rich in conductive minerals. Some researchers believe the entire plateau once functioned as an energy platform drawing power from magnetic fields that converge in that region. It's almost poetic. The gods didn't bring lightning from the sky, they learned how to summon it from the ground. And perhaps that was the true purpose of the global grid, not worship, not vanity, but communication. The earth was their antenna, and the stars were their destination. But the system is broken now. The ley lines still hum faintly, but the temples no longer sing. The connections have been severed, their harmonies silenced by time erosion and human forgetfulness. Maybe the builders knew that would happen. Maybe that's why they buried the deepest chambers sealed, the tunnels erased the blueprints, not out of fear of humanity's ignorance, but to protect us from what happens when the circuit closes again. And yet, every so often the system flickers. Lights appear over sacred sites. Magnetic compasses spin near old stones. Strange hums ripple through the earth, low resonant tones that instruments can record but not explain. You might call it superstition, or you might call it the first tremor of a machine remembering that it once lived. If the gods did build this network, they didn't just leave monuments. They left a switch. And perhaps somewhere beneath the dust and the circuits of modern life, someone has already found it and is deciding whether to turn it back on. You've traced the stones, the symbols, the tunnels, and the buried power grid, but they all lead toward a silence that seems deliberate. A vanishing point. The ancients didn't just stop building, they left. All the myths agree across continents and tongues, one day the gods withdrew from the earth. The question is never, if only, why. The Egyptians said the divine rulers sailed away on the bark of Ra when mankind turned chaotic. The Maya told of the sky beings who returned to the stars after the fifth sun failed. The Greeks mourned a golden age when gods still walked among men, then fled Olympus in disgust. Even the Old Testament echoes it, Yahweh departing the temple, the ark abandoned, the voice silent. Civilizations crumble, but the departure is always described with reverence and sorrow, like the extinguishing of a sun. You picture it a global twilight of wonder. Temples left half-finished rituals performed by priests who no longer heard replies. The megaliths that once thrummed with power growing cold. Humanity waking one morning to find that heaven had closed its doors. Some scholars dismiss these myths as allegory, a poetic expression of societal decline or the loss of old cults. But the archaeological record complicates that theory. Many of the greatest constructions, the Pyramid of the Sun, Baalbek's Trilithon Göbekli Tepe's enclosures, were abandoned abruptly, not gradually. Work stopped mid-design, with no signs of invasion or catastrophe. The builders sealed their temples, buried their sanctuaries, and vanished. You've seen this pattern before. The same precision that once defied explanation now looks like preparation, like a civilization tidying up before leaving home. The Popol Vuh sacred text of the Quiche Maya hints at a celestial recall. It says they ascended, leaving the people of clay to guard the fire. In the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki ascended to the heavens after the Great Flood, taking their tools of creation with them. Egyptian inscriptions from Edfu speak of the builders of the North, divine craftsmen, who sailed away to the islands of flame. You notice the recurrence of flight, not metaphorical, but literal. The gods didn't fade into myth, they departed, and what followed was silence and struggle. Human civilization restarted, but smaller, simpler, fractured. Stonework declined. Myths multiplied. Perhaps that was intentional. If the gods had truly been engineers, beings of knowledge, not magic, then maybe their exodus was an act of mercy. Imagine giving a child a loaded weapon, watching them nearly destroy themselves, then taking it away until they could be trusted. Still, evidence remains that some humans tried to follow. Ancient star maps, such as those carved in Nabta Playa or the ceiling of Dendera, depict constellations as routes rather than symbols, paths across the heavens. The same patterns appear in the Andes in Australia, in Mesopotamia. It's as though the builders left behind a kind of cosmic trailhead, pointing to where they'd gone. A tantalizing hint lies in the Dogon tribe of Mali. Long before modern telescopes, they knew that Sirius had an invisible companion star, Sirius B, and that it orbited once every 50 years. They said their ancestors came from there. When asked how they knew, their priests simply smiled. The sky taught us before it left. You can feel it now that the story isn't one of fantasy, but of abandonment. The builders didn't vanish into mythic nothingness. They left behind a planet that still vibrates with their memory. And perhaps they intended us to rediscover the path to evolve until we could follow. Yet the myths also carry warnings. The Book of Enoch tells of angels who descended, gave mankind forbidden knowledge, and were punished for it. The Hopi say the gods withdrew after humans used the fire from the earth irresponsibly. The pattern repeats: the gift of knowledge, the misuse, the exodus. You think back to the hidden energy network from the last section, the global circuit now dormant. If the gods were its builders, maybe they didn't leave entirely. Maybe they retreated through it, vanishing into frequencies, slipping between dimensions of resonance, like a song leaving the range of human hearing. And the ruins, the tunnels, the power lines, they could all be part of that escape mechanism, a ladder not to heaven, but to elsewhere. It's a strange comfort to imagine them not as omnipotent beings, but as exiles. The last of their kind taking flight as their world collapsed. You can almost picture it, massive craft, rising from mountaintops that are now ruins, columns of light, fading into the dawn, the stones trembling as the air itself changes, and then stillness, the sky swallowing the gods whole. But there's a question that haunts even that image. If they truly left, why do so many myths promise that they'll return? The Sumerians spoke of the time of reappearance. The Mayans marked the cycles of their descent. The Egyptians called it the Zep Tepi, the first and last time, when gods would again walk among men. Could the global energy grid, now silent, be waiting for their signal, an ancient resonance that, once restored, will open the path again? You look up at the night sky, and it looks back cold, infinite, familiar. Somewhere out there, the architects of our myths may still be watching, waiting for the planet to hum at the right frequency. When that moment comes, humanity won't be the first civilization to look up in wonder. It will simply be the next. When the gods departed, they didn't take everything with them. Some fragments remained scattered, buried, encoded, not in temples or tunnels, but in us. You followed the trail through stone and silence, through light and magnetic fields. But now the investigation turns inward. Because the last ruins of the divine may not lie beneath the earth. They may lie within the human mind. Something changed in us once, suddenly and without precedent. Around 12,000 years ago, long after anatomically modern humans had existed, the spark of civilization ignited. We went from painting caves to building cities, from wandering tribes to astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers. The leap was abrupt, too abrupt. Geneticists call it the Great Leap Forward. Archaeologists call it behavioral modernity. And mythologists, they call it the moment when the gods breathed into man. It's tempting to treat that as metaphor, divine inspiration, poetic breath. But then you recall that human DNA itself contains traces of something anomalous inserted sequences that appear artificial as if edited. The so-called human accelerated regions, HARs, are stretches of DNA that evolved far faster than any natural process should allow. One called HAR1 governs the development of the neocortex, the very seat of language and abstract thought. It appeared suddenly with no clear evolutionary ancestor. Some scientists half-jokingly call it the spark plug of the brain. The gods, if they ever existed, didn't just leave monuments. They may have left instructions. Even our myths preserve this transition with eerie precision. In the Sumerian Enuma Elish, the gods fashion humanity to bear the burden of the work, but they also grant language and order. The book of Genesis describes God forming man from dust, then breathing life into him, ruach, spirit, or wind. The Greeks speak of Prometheus stealing fire, a symbol of knowledge, and gifting it to humankind. The Egyptians told of Thoth teaching men writing and measure. It's always the same exchange, knowledge traded for innocence, progress born from disobedience. And when you look closer, these stories resemble not moral lessons, but transfer protocols, myths wrapped around memory. The human mind expanding because something or someone unlocked it. Consider Göbekli Tepe again. When it was built, humans were supposed to be hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no cities, no hierarchy. Yet there it stands, pillars carved with astronomical precision, animals arrayed like constellations. No precedent, no prototypes. It appeared fully formed like a downloaded idea. Then curiously, it was buried on purpose as if its creators had finished their experiment and wanted to hide the evidence. That pattern repeats across the world. Ancient sites appear at the dawn of civilization, already perfected, as if the early chapters of human history were written by memory, not invention. A whisper of guidance embedded deep enough to survive floods and collapses. Maybe the gods' true gift wasn't tools or temples, but a cognitive seed, a program meant to unfold gradually until we became their successors. You think of how every major religious system includes some version of divine inheritance. The Gnostics said a spark of God lives in every human soul. The Hindus spoke of Atman, the divine self identical to Brahman, the universal consciousness. Even modern physics in its strangest corners begins to flirt with similar ideas that consciousness might be fundamental, not emergent, that the universe itself could be aware. If that's true, then humanity's rise wasn't an accident of biology, it was a continuation of something older. The divine didn't vanish. It simply changed vessels. Still, there's a darker interpretation. What if this inheritance was never a gift, but a failsafe? A way for the gods to preserve themselves in case their civilization fell? What if the breath they gave us was their own consciousness, fragmented, diluted, but waiting to reassemble? You wouldn't recognize it. You'd just call it imagination, genius, the sudden intuition that feels older than thought. The flash of insight that built pyramids and printed circuit boards alike. It's a haunting possibility that we are their descendants and their containers. That every invention, every myth, every leap forward is the buried memory of a species that once called itself divine. You pause to consider the small, persistent anomalies in human history, those bursts of brilliance that appear centuries before their time. The Antikythera mechanism, Roman concrete, Damascus steel, even the forgotten Babylonian battery technologies that appear, vanish, and re-emerge millennia later, as if someone keeps remembering in fragments. There's an almost poetic rhythm to it, revelation, loss, rediscovery. The cycle of remembering what we once were. You start to wonder whether the gods truly left us, or whether they just went to sleep inside our genes. After all, if the builders of the ancient network understood energy and resonance, perhaps they encoded their essence not in matter, but in frequency, and DNA with its coiled, vibrating geometry might be the perfect receiver. Each strand hums faintly tuned to cosmic background radiation, whispering secrets too deep for the conscious mind to hear. And sometimes, maybe in dreams or moments of genius, the connection flickers on. It would explain the strange déjà vu of ancient architecture, how humans keep recreating forms they shouldn't remember. The same angles, the same temples, the same symbols of sun and serpent and spiral. We build pyramids again in glass and steel, unaware we're copying the oldest blueprint of all the architecture of the gods rewritten in human ambition. That's the inheritance, the unshakable urge to build upward, to defy entropy, to reach for the stars even when we don't know why. The divine impulse to continue the work long after the original builders have gone. Maybe that's why we search the heavens for signals. Maybe that's why we keep digging in the earth for proof. We are the message looking for the messenger. And if the gods ever do return, they might not find worshippers waiting only their own reflection, standing upright and asking finally what took you so long. You stand before the last thread of the mystery, a silence that hums louder than sound. For 24 chapters, the trail has wound through ruins, symbols, frequencies, and bloodlines. Now it leads here to a single, unverified rumor, a transmission that should not exist. It began as a fragment of data buried in NASA's Deep Space Network archives, tagged only as Event Echo 72. Recorded in 1977, weeks after the famous WOW signal, it was dismissed as interference, but unlike the WOW burst, Echo 72 didn't vanish. It repeated. Every 12 years, faint and irregular, as if orbiting something massive beyond the edge of our system. Its frequency, 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the universal language of communication. Its modulation, non-random, structured. For decades, it remained a curiosity studied quietly by SETI technicians and dismissed publicly as noise. But a handful of independent researchers, ex-astronomers, signal analysts, one retired cryptographer noticed something strange. The data, when processed as audio, produced tones that mirrored the resonant ratios of ancient sacred sites, 1:11 Hz, 432 Hz, 528 Hz. The same frequencies that shaped the architecture of the ruins of the divine. Coincidence, maybe. But then came the alignment. In 2023, when the signal returned again, its pattern matched the geometric proportions of Göbekli Tepe's oldest enclosure, not in time, but in rhythm. The pauses between each tone formed the same sequence as the spacing between the 12 central pillars. It was as if the transmission were a score composed to resonate with the Earth's oldest temple. No one claimed responsibility. No human transmitter could have produced the signal the strength required would exceed any civilian or military array. And yet there it was. You begin to wonder if this was the final message. Not a call from the stars, but a reply to something we unknowingly sent long ago. Because if the gods encoded their essence in vibration and form, then every monument, every aligned structure might have been transmitting continuously low-frequency hums resonating into space unnoticed. A planetary chorus built not to pray, but to announce we are here. And maybe after 12,000 years, someone finally answered. You look back at the pattern 12-year cycles, hydrogen line modulation, ancient frequency ratios, the number 12 again sacred across civilizations, 12 gods of Olympus, 12 tribes, 12 months, 12 pillars at Göbekli Tepe, the same structure repeating through myth, mathematics, and now signal. It feels orchestrated. If Echo 72 is authentic, if it truly originates from beyond Earth, then perhaps it's not alien in the way we imagine. Perhaps it's ancestral. The final proof that the architects of the first civilizations didn't vanish, they ascended. Not in mythic chariots of fire, but in light data frequency. They became the resonance itself, the hum that vibrates between stars. And perhaps they've been waiting for us to rediscover the language they left behind. The language isn't words or symbols, it's architecture, geometry, sound, energy arranged into form a syntax of existence. The same syntax carved into stone at Göbekli Tepe, encoded in Egyptian hieroglyphs, reflected in Mayan calendars, and now pulsing through a deep space signal that echoes every 12 years. It's the architecture of continuity, the design of memory itself. You recall the ancient claim carved on the walls of Edfu Temple, "We built as it was built before." The line once seemed poetic, but now it reads as instruction. Humanity has always been rebuilding something it barely remembers, guided by an unseen hand that could very well be its own. If the gods once walked the earth, they may have left not only ruins, but coordinates. Coordinates in stone, sound, and DNA, each aligned to the next, forming a chain of connection across millennia. A relay, a network of remembrance. And maybe the network just came online. That's what the final signal could be, the handshake across time. The completion of a loop that began when humanity looked up and mistook memory for divinity. You listen again to the hum of wind through ancient stones, to the vibration of the earth, to the quiet frequency behind your own heartbeat. You begin to realize it's the same rhythm, the same pattern, the same pulse that binds atoms, planets, and minds. The divine wasn't lost. It was never gone. It's just been waiting for someone to recognize its voice. And when that voice speaks, whether through radio waves, temple stones, or the neurons that carry your thoughts, it doesn't say worship. It says remember, because the gods did not leave ruins to be revered. They left instructions to rebuild them. It begins as a tremor not in the earth, but in your understanding, the slow, dawning sense that everything you've uncovered wasn't a collection of coincidences, but fragments of one immense design. You stand at the center of it now, among blueprints older than language and energies older than light. What you once thought of as separate sites, Baalbek, Pumapunku, Angkor Giza, start to overlap like transparent maps. The alignments converge, the angles whisper. Every ruin begins to hum the same note. You trace that vibration, the resonance that connects continents, epochs, and myths. It pulses through geometry, proportion, and mythic symbolism, the same ratio linking the Great Pyramid's base to its height, the same angle in the ziggurats of Sumer, the same arc drawn through Mayan observatories. None of these cultures should have known one another, yet their monuments speak the same architectural language as though built from a shared memory rather than shared trade. Archaeologists call it diffusion. Theologians call it revelation. But you begin to suspect it's something far older than either, something that survived the erasures of floodfire and conquest, an inheritance passed through ruin and ritual. Humanity's collective attempt to rebuild the lattice of a lost world. You return to the flood myths that ripple across civilizations. Each speaks of destruction, followed by instruction, the gods returning to teach survivors how to measure land, build cities, chart stars. The same story under 100 names. But what if those weren't gods descending? What if they were engineers of memory restoring the grid that once covered the earth? A network both physical and energetic, mapped in stone and sky alike. Consider this: the distance between Giza and Easter Island divides perfectly into Earth's circumference by a factor of pi. The line connecting Stonehenge to Delphi crosses Baalbek with uncanny precision, and beneath each site, Seismic readings reveal magnetic anomalies, subtle but persistent, as if the stones themselves were channeling something. It's not enough to power a light bulb, but it's enough to register as organized energy. You remember the earlier chapters, the builders who vanished, the serpent that slithered between continents, the fire from the gods. They all point to one theme transmission, not just of myth, but of method. Each ruin a node in a system that once spanned the planet, each temple a capacitor storing not electricity, but resonance, the hum of alignment between human intention and planetary frequency. That's why the ancients built with impossible precision. It wasn't about aesthetic perfection. It was about tuning. When they carved a block to within a fraction of a millimeter, they weren't flexing craftsmanship. They were matching the vibrational key of the earth beneath it. When the wind passed through the corridors of Karnak or Chavin, it wasn't mere sound, it was calibration. And when they spoke of gods walking among them, they weren't describing physical giants. They were describing frequencies, intelligences made manifest through geometry, sound, and structure. Divinity encoded in architecture. You begin to see the pattern not as superstition, but as physics. Every myth of descent, every symbol of light, every story of a god teaching humankind how to build it all fits once you accept one heretical premise that the divine was never supernatural. It was technological. The machines of the gods weren't engines of metal and flame, but harmonic construct systems designed to align human consciousness with the planet's natural energy fields. The temples were not houses of worship, but interfaces, ways to connect, to remember, to communicate. And when humanity lost the knowledge to operate them, religion filled the vacuum. What was once an equation became a prayer. What was once resonance became ritual. But if the network was ever fully activated, what would it have done? Ancient texts hint at an age when the world was in harmony. No famine, no storms, no wars, only balance. The gods didn't rule then. They resonated. The planet itself sang. That harmony might not have been metaphorical. Some scientists speculate that geomagnetic fields can influence human emotion and cognition. Imagine a civilization that built temples precisely to modulate that, to generate peace not through laws or armies, but through planetary resonance. Then came the disruption, perhaps the flood, perhaps a cosmic event, perhaps our own arrogance. The network fractured. The songs fell silent. The gods departed, or rather the system shut down. And what remained were the husks of connection, the shells of divine machines we call ruins. You picture the world as it once might have been, the Great Pyramid glowing faintly under the night sky, frequencies rippling through the air. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia humming like tuning forks, lines of energy weaving between mountains, oceans, and hearts. A planet alive with design. And now, in the quiet present, you see the same geometry reflected in modern grids, satellite arrays, data cables, the circuitry of cities. Humanity unknowingly rebuilding the lost lattice. The same pattern rediscovered with silicon instead of stone. You wonder if this is evolution or recurrence. Maybe we were meant to rediscover it. Maybe the ruins weren't warnings, but blueprints. Maybe the gods, or whatever they were, wanted us to complete what they began. But a question lingers, soft and cold. What happens when the pattern is whole again? If every site hums once more in resonance, if the alignments are reactivated, if the forgotten frequencies rise, will the divine return as it was? Or as something new, will it greet us as kin or as trespassers who rebuilt what was never ours to command? The answer may already be unfolding. The signals, the magnetic surges, the inexplicable lights over ancient sites, they're increasing. Perhaps the earth remembers the song and is beginning to hum again. You close your eyes. Beneath the hum of modern life, you can almost hear it, low, patient, ancient. The pulse beneath civilization. The pattern beneath the ruins. The heartbeat of what once was divine. And if you listen closely, it almost sounds like your own. The world has grown loud again, too bright, too mechanical, too certain of itself. Cities hum with electric veins, satellites drift across the black, and the sky glows with signals instead of stars. Yet somewhere beneath the noise, that old frequency is stirring. You can feel it. It moves in tremors, in the low throb of the earth, in the whispers that seem to ripple through stone and storm alike. Maybe it's imagination. Or maybe the builders, those architects of impossible ages, are waking from their long silence. When you stand before the ruins now, they no longer feel like relics. They feel like waiting. The air around Baalbek, Giza, and Angkor seems heavier than before, as though it holds a question that hasn't yet found its voice. Perhaps the gods were never gone. Perhaps they have been listening, waiting for humanity to reach back for us, to rebuild the signal strong enough to call them home. If that is true, then what comes next will not be revelation. It will be reunion. And reunions, as history teaches, are never gentle. The return of the divine would not arrive with thunder or war, but with recognition, the quiet, terrible understanding that what we once worshipped was simply what we were destined to become. The gods were builders, creators, engineers of resonance. And now, standing atop their ruins, surrounded by our own towers of light and code, we have become reflections of them. Maybe that was always the plan, the long arc of history bending back toward the divine blueprint. Maybe every myth, every ruin, every whisper was less a memory and more a message: finish what we began. And if the gods return through frequency, through awakening through us, they won't come as saviors or conquerors. They'll come as recognition. The line between them and us has been thinning for millennia, eroded by progress, by curiosity, by the stubborn human refusal to stop building. When the final temple stands completed, whether of stone or steel or thought, it will not summon their presence. It will reveal that they never left. So you breathe. You let the hum settle around you, soft as twilight. The stones no longer seem ancient. They seem alive. The pattern beneath them, beneath everything, pulses faintly, a heartbeat shared between worlds. You can almost hear it, deep, slow, endless. The ruins are not endings. They are beginnings disguised as silence. And as the wind moves through the broken gates, you whisper back to the architects of the impossible, not in prayer, but in promise we remember. Now sleep. Let the hum cradle you. Let the pattern breathe. Somewhere between dream and memory, the gods wait, smiling.